Call this meeting to order. This is the 82nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. I want to apologize just to our guests. There was a delay in the House that caused us to not start the meeting exactly on time. We are continuing pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, our pre-budget consultations 2012. We have with us in this panel 5 organizations with us. We have, first of all, the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations. We have the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors. We have the Investment Industry Association of Canada, the Portfolio Management Association of Canada, and the Rideau Institute. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statement. We will start with Mr. Daler, and we'll work our way down the row, and then we'll have questions from members. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of our 25 student associations across the country, representing over 300,000 students, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to appear before you today and bring forward our recommendations. Canada needs more educated people with less debt. Canada recently fell from 8th to 12th place in the rankings of the Global Innovation Index and from 19th to 25th place for investment in human capital and research. This shows that compared to other nations, Canada is not investing enough in higher education and research and development to keep pace. While our outputs are good, other countries are catching up. CASA believes the government should invest in programs that are working and further invest in those that will complement future success. By 2017, university and college education will be required for 75% of new jobs. The problem, however, is the costs of attaining an education are increasing at a dizzying pace, a fact I know everyone in this room is aware of. Since 1991, the costs of education have more than tripled. In the decade between 2000 and 2010, costs of education increased more than 211%. Given the increased costs, more and more students are turning to loans, both public and private, to fund their education, ultimately driving up their debt loads upon graduation. In 2010, Statistics Canada reported we are graduating students 10 years financially behind. The government can help address this by increasing grant funding through the Canada Student Grant Program. Since 2010, the CSGP has reduced the average student loan by $461. For a reasonable investment, the government can do even more by increasing available funding by 25% per qualified student. Such an investment will reduce the overall debt for low and middle income students, helping some of those with the most need. Canada's universities and colleges are also magnets for global talent, and as a country we want to not only cultivate the best and the brightest, we should also want to attract them. Last year it was announced that 1,000 doctoral students would be accepted for the permanent residency under the Federal Skilled Worker Program. The value of attracting and retaining international students is found both within the classroom and their contributions to the overall economy. The government should consider extending a similar fast-track to permanent residency program for international master's, undergraduate, and college students in disciplines that would address Canada's labour shortages. We also need to have a focus on creating opportunity for Canadians. Demographic projections illustrate that one of the most important investments the government can make is in the Aboriginal population of Canada, which is forecast to grow to 1.4 million by 2017. However, the program currently structured to support First Nations and Inuit students is under a 2% funding cap placed on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada. The PSSP is an example of a program that could ensure future success if better funded. Those who have received funding are accessing and completing their education, and this is a positive. We're recommending the government remove the 2% funding cap on the post-secondary student support program, fund the backlog of students who have been denied funding, and ensure that the program is adequately funded into the future. This week is also Open Access Week, and Canada needs to ensure that tomorrow's labour force has every means at their disposal to create, manufacture, innovate, and discover. This cannot be ensured through training alone. At present, most of the new findings and information generated through this research is paid for through public dollars, but it is not publicly available. The government should motivate innovation and entrepreneurial spirit by enacting legislation requiring the federal tri-agencies, SSHRC and CERC and CIHR, to ensure that all findings produced with publicly funded research is made available in an open access format. And in closing, I'd like to draw your attention to the importance of creating incentives for youth employment. Finding a job is one of the greatest challenges facing youth and students today. Canada's economy has added jobs, but youth have been left behind. To cover costs of living, tuition, and academic materials, many students supplement available financial assistance by working during their studies. It has been reported that during the last year of an undergraduate program, 62% of students work on average 18 hours per week. Our members were pleased to see the government take action on the income work assessment. Now we ask the committee take the next steps and remove this earnings penalty altogether. No Canadian should be punished for earning a living. The budget is a reflection of priorities, and CASA believes every investment in education is an investment in our future prosperity and is a symbol of what makes Canada great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Schultz, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Schultz. I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors. Joining me today is in the gallery here is Mr. Doug Strong, president of Completions and Production at Precision Drilling Corp., and Mr. Kevin Krausert, business development manager at Beaver Drilling Limited. Precision Well Servicing is the largest publicly traded service contractor in Canada, while Beaver Drilling is one of the oldest private family-owned drilling contractor, and we represent both those contractors. On behalf of the entire membership, thank you for inviting me to speak and participate in these important discussions. CAODC represents 45 drilling rig contractors and 76 service rig contractors. We represent 100% of the drilling rig fleet in Canada, so that's approximately 820 rigs, and 98% of the service rig fleet, or approximately 1,100 service rigs. Our membership is committed to promoting culture of safety excellence in the industry, acting in the best interests of our member companies, their employees, and the industry as a whole, and continuing a strong tradition of leadership and cooperation. The Canadian drilling and service rig industry is a critical sector within Canada's upstream oil and gas community. We provide a necessary service for our clients, oil and gas producers, to develop Canada's petroleum resources. The drilling and service rig industry is part of a larger petroleum services sector. It employs thousands of Canadians from coast to coast and significantly contributes to Canada's overall GDP. Moreover, the drilling and service rig community is recognized internationally for its innovation, technology, and training standards. My presentation will address four major themes: the promotion of a competitive investment destination, labor challenges, market diversification, and a natural gas strategy. The government needs to continue to promote a competitive regulatory and fiscal regime in order to attract oil and gas investment. Our business relies on oil and gas producers to invest capital into new projects, oil and gas wells, in order to be profitable. The oil and gas industry is a competitive business. Consequently, the industry is competing globally for this capital. Investors have a range of opinions or options to consider. In order for Canada to take full advantage of these opportunities, it needs to provide a stable and competitive regulatory and fiscal regime. When an investment is made to develop Canada's petroleum resources, it is the drilling and service rig industry, along with a multitude of other service providers, who directly benefit from this investment. The investment provides Canadians with good-paying jobs and the raw materials to heat their homes and power their cars. For every rig that is working, it generates 135 direct and indirect jobs. On the labor supply, Canada needs to address the critical labor challenges. Canada's oil and gas industry is one of the most expensive jurisdictions in the world to do business. Although geography is certainly a major contributor to these costs, the lack of labor is a growing concern. It is the labor supply. If the labor supply is not addressed, it could have significant cost implications through unsustainable wages and inflation. The existing domestic labor force needs to be utilized effectively. There are regions in the country with an oversupply of jobs, while there have been an oversupply of people without work in other areas. The government should incentivize Canadians to relocate to where some of these jobs are. This could be accomplished through programs such as employment insurance or other forms of government financial support. Another option would be to provide tax credits for businesses to provide assistance to relocate workers or travel for seasonal work. Canadian businesses are experiencing the challenges of a growing retirement population. This will have an impact on future economic growth as experience and the industry knowledge leave the workforce and industry moves to transition that knowledge to new workers. The government should consider incentivizing individuals to stay in the workforce longer. This could be done through existing government pension plans, whereby an individual continues to contribute past 65, however receives higher benefits at a later retirement date. The government needs to address market access for our crude and natural gas products. In Western Canada, petroleum products are sold at a discount to WTI and Brent. The result is a loss of significant revenue for the industry and the Canadian government. The industry requires broader market access, particularly to the emerging Asian markets. Moreover, it requires expanded capacity to the United States and Eastern Canadian markets. Canada is not taking full advantage of its resource economy because of the lack of market diversification. Finally, on the natural gas strategy. Over the next several decades, fossil fuels will still be the dominant player in our energy mix. Most major energy analysts are supportive of this fact.
Okay. Let's just wrap it up very quickly, please.
In conclusion, Canada is in an envious economic position. Much of the developed world is in economic crisis. With strong leadership, Canada can certainly position itself to prosper. Thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion and look forward to your questions, particularly on the natural gas strategy, which I was timed out on. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll hear from Ms. Amsden, please.
Barbara Amsden, Director of the Investment Industry Association of Canada, or the IIC. C'est avec plaisir que je vous fais part des commentaires.
It's with pleasure that I share some of the comments of our association, the ICCIC.
Employees across the country range from small regional institutional and retail boutiques to national full-service companies. The interests of our members and the country's economy are closely aligned, with our members raising nearly $130 billion in equity and debt to fund businesses, not-for-profits, and all levels of government last year. We continue to face a sluggish domestic economy and global recovery, high Canadian dollar, and turbulent capital markets. Investors are skittish about the markets. Corporations are holding cash in reserve, now 30% of GDP, 3 times the historical average. The effect is that capital spending on productive investment has declined. In Q3, there were only 7 IPOs valued at $270 million, compared with $540 million in 20 IPOs last year. At the same time, household debt is increasing. We face demographic shifts that will demand new ways of thinking to provide for healthcare and support systems for an aging population. To cope with these challenges, government must rely on revenue from sustained economic growth and continued efficient program spending. We commend the federal government's continued prudent financial management and recommend that this continue. We urge government to keep the current competitive corporate tax rate level. Lower rates have not led to a decline in corporate tax revenues, in fact, quite the contrary. On the household debt side, we support the government's tough love decision to tighten mortgage lending rules. While good fiscal management, competitive taxes, and balanced borrowing are key parts in the investment cycle, we need increased individual and corporate investment. Just as the circulatory system is vital to the healthy functioning of every human being, the circulation of our savings is critical for our economic health. At the top of the handout, you'll all have something with squiggles all over it with blue, generally blue color. You'll see a stylized view of the economic circulatory system, showing money saved by millions of Canadians, becoming productive investments, generating jobs, and leading to taxes, contributing to a better standard of living for Canadians who save, and so on. That's the kind of round document that you see before you. The second diagram below it shows within the investment capital formation part of the cycle the role of seed money, angel investors, venture capitalists, regulated investment dealers, who are our members. Our members channel savings of Canadians into private and public investment instruments such as stocks and bonds. Blockages at any point in the system can have serious consequences, and we think that there are some blockages at various stages. A number are due to our genetics, our economy's composition. 60% of the TSX index are energy and financial institutions. Some blocks are environmental, the uncertainty in the U.S., and the Eurozone. Others have risen when prescriptions taken to address one problem have caused harm elsewhere. Neither our large national nor our small regional members can do what they do best without a steady flow of smaller companies growing to the size when the services our members offer come into play, and our members can't do as well as they might at that stage due to increasing costs. As with our personal health, we need preventative and restorative measures, and we propose antidotes we think you can recommend, and also rely on your power to draw attention to ones you cannot. The symptoms of our weak economy is not enough capital at key stages in the financing cycle, particularly capital-intensive.
Sorry, Ms. Anderson, I'm being told the interpreters are finding you a little too
talk
fast.
Okay.
So we just slow you down just a touch, please.
I will, thank you. Capital-intensive, innovative businesses with large research or technology risks that venture capitals don't address, companies with traditional market and other risks that venture funds can finance successfully. Our diagnosis? While some problems are outside our control, some arise from aspects of financing programs or their lack, and others from imbalances in the regulatory and tax systems. People must have confidence in the markets and taxpayers that taxes will be paid. Not surprisingly, governments have determined that for investors and taxpayers to feel protected, regulation is the answer, but sometimes it's been at the detriment of other parts of the markets. So Canada's securities commissions protect investors, but they must also promote fair and efficient capital markets. We have examples where we think that the balance isn't right. CRA has a duty to ensure taxes are paid, but the combined rules and administration that are our tax system also affect the savings to investment process. Still too fast? Okay. The remedies we prescribe are in the circle on the back part of that I've shown you: building out angel networks, setting a net return to Canada requirement. Second, expanding the risk capital for growth businesses. There are a couple of ways we can talk about there, but most importantly, the flow-through share concept, which is like it has been in use in the oil and gas industry. Third, fostering the move beyond the growth stage through public-private partnerships and educating owner-operators on financing options. Fourth, at the IPO stage, changing capital gains treatment, but just for the higher risk investments. And fifth, ensuring a better regulatory cost efficiency, better balance of securities and tax rules, improved entrepreneurial and financial literacy, annual checkups. Be pleased to answer your questions later.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Ms. Walmsley, please.
Yes. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to appear before the committee this morning. My name is Kitty Walmsley, and I am the president of the Portfolio Management Association of Canada, PMAC, or AGPC in French, and formerly ACIC. Scott Mahaffey, Vice President, Legal Affairs of McLean Buddens, is in fact the chair of our Industry Regulation and Tax Committee, and he is here with me today.
Either Scott or myself will be happy to comment. PMAC is comprised of over 170 investment firms from across Canada that manage investment portfolios for pension plans, foundations, endowments, and individual Canadians saving for retirement. Our total assets under management are over $800 billion and close to $1 trillion if including mutual fund assets. Given much of these assets are in the form of pension and retirement savings, our recommendations today will center around measures to help Canadians protect, preserve, and grow their capital to ensure they have adequate savings for a comfortable retirement. I'd like to start with applauding the government for two initiatives, which, when implemented, will go a long way to help Canadians grow and protect their savings. Firstly, the introduction of the pooled registered pension plans, and secondly, the pursuit of one common securities regulator. Let's start with the common regulator. Why do Canadians need one? What's wrong with the current fragmented, costly system? According to the recently released 2012 CSA Investor Index, 27% of Canadians believe that they've been approached with a fraudulent investment opportunity at some point in their life. Yet among this number, just 29% have reported this to the authorities. The establishment of one common securities regulator will help improve investor protection against fraud and will ultimately increase investor confidence in the capital markets. We believe that the Supreme Court decision December 2011 ruling suggested that the next step forward is for the government to develop constitutionally sound legislation that supports streamlined securities legislation in Canada. We truly believe that a common securities regulator is in the best interests of Canadians. We therefore recommend that the federal government extend the budget of the Canadian Securities Transition Office for at least one other fiscal year to allow them to continue their work and to work with the provinces cooperatively to make this objective a reality. Secondly, we want to applaud the government for the recent introduction of the pooled registered pension plans. This is a very positive step forward, filling a gap for many Canadians who do not have traditional pension plans. We encourage the government to continue to work with the provincial counterparts to expand the use of PRPPs across Canada. We would, however, suggest that given the likelihood that many provinces will not make PRPPs mandatory, we recommend the federal government introduce specific tax incentives for employers to set up PRPPs or other retirement savings vehicles. Details of these incentives are outlined in our formal submission, but we believe these incentives will help kickstart PRPPs and make them a success. What other initiatives would help Canadians save for their retirement? For starters, let's look at the tax they're paying for professional management of their retirement savings. There's a value-added tax principle that tax should be paid at the time of consumption. Very logical. What doesn't make sense to us is why individual Canadians and pension plans must pay GST and in harmonized provinces HST for the professional management of their retirement savings. They are in effect paying tax twice. When HST came into effect in Ontario and Nova Scotia as examples, the pension plans in those provinces had to pay an additional tax, and 8% in Ontario, 10% in Nova Scotia, on the management fees. As you are all well aware, pension plans are already struggling with unfunded liabilities. The government has struck a committee that is looking at the taxation of financial services. And in light of the issue and the priority the government has given to retirement savings, we urge them to look holistically at a solution around tax that would simplify the tax for retirement savings and ease the burden for Canadians. One final suggestion. Canadians presently are encouraged to have the opportunity to invest globally. The government is also making international trade a priority. Many of the emerging markets, however, are not open to ordinary Canadians. There is a designated stock exchange list that limits about 40% of the exchanges are within North America, 40% in Europe, and only 3% in emerging markets. Current list does not provide adequate risk diversification and optimum asset allocation and is completely out of date. We urge the government to both update the list and to streamline the process of keeping the exchanges current. Thank you. Merci.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Staples, please.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee and guests. Thank you for inviting me back to present our pre-budget consultation recommendations. My name is Steve Staples. I'm the president of the Rideau Institute. The Rideau Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research, advocacy, and consulting group founded in 2006 with an expertise in Canadian defense and foreign policy. And we do not receive funding from the government or from firms. We're funded from donations from individuals and from consulting services we provide to nonprofits and trade unions. I myself have been working in the field of defense spending and disarmament for about 20 years. Our pre-budget submission has 3 main points for the government. First, to further reduce defense expenditures with the goal of returning to pre-9/11-2001 levels over time. Second, to improve parliamentary and therefore public oversight of the military procurement processes. And third, to invest in Canadian industry by providing targeted support to areas of the economy where Canada is a world leader. Defense spending today in Canada, even with the modest reductions made recently, remains at historically high levels. The dramatic buildup of defense budgets in the last decade, sometimes exceeding 10% a year, has left defense spending roughly 40% higher than before the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 9/11. I provided a chart from 2011 that documents in adjusted dollars where the budget is in real spending. We are 6th highest in NATO right now. And in adjusted dollars, our defense spending is higher than at any point since the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And I've also included a chart in the packages as well. But the security situation has changed. We have a budget deficit and economic challenges at home. Our Afghanistan combat mission is over, and Osama bin Laden is dead. Despite this, the government continues to commit to expensive procurement programs like the F-35 and the shipbuilding program. It's evident from the analysis provided by the Parliamentary Budget Officer and the Auditor General that the costs of these programs have not been properly assessed by the Department of National Defense and are not likely affordable even with the increased spending commitments within the Canada First Defence Strategy. The national defence budget must be brought into line. As well, improved parliamentary oversight over major Crown projects would increase transparency in defense procurement and accountability of the government and military contractors. A dedicated parliamentary committee for major Crown projects would provide Canadians with additional confidence that public dollars are being used wisely, fairly, and efficiently. For instance, on the F-35 stealth fighters, the public's been greatly confused by statements made by the government on costs that are frankly unpredictable, contracts that don't exist, and job opportunities that are little more than a hope and a prayer. Establishing a parliamentary committee or a subcommittee responsible for major Crown projects would help avoid the mistakes and complications that have arisen in many of the department's projects and help cut through some of the spin from the defense contractors and ministers. Finally, defense procurement strategies have not reflected the government's goal of economic recovery and growth in key areas of the economy. The lack of a competitive process and sole sourcing contracts has not guaranteed the industrial regional benefits that are essential for Canadian employment in these projects. For instance, there are no requirements for investment and job creation in the F-35 program. And I ask, what about the equally large shipbuilding program now? Where are the guarantees for jobs and investment there? Investments should be made where they stand the greatest chance of long-term benefit. Media reports have suggested that the government is interested in a defense industrial strategy. This just doesn't make sense. With defense budgets declining globally, respected financial analysts such as PwC point to the commercial market as the best bet. Canada's future is in Bombardier's passenger jets, not Lockheed Martin's fighter jets. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll go to members' questions. Et on va commencer avec M. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
And we'll begin with Mr. Caron. Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Amsden and Mr. Schultz, because you've made the same comments more or less in your presentations, and I thank all of you for your presentations and for being here today. You spoke about reducing the debt to 28.6 in one sense and 25%. This is nothing new per se. In the case of Mr. Schultz, you suggested that there should be competitive rates, corporate tax rates, and the reduction of, I think since 2000 there's been a drop. Since 2000, as I say, there's been a drop in the corporate tax rates. That has generated a substantial loss of revenue for the federal government, partially compensated for by a rise. I'm translating. Yes, yes. Can you hear the English interpreter?
Okay, apologies. Okay.
Donc, il y a une diminution assez substantielle. Maintenant,
there is a rather substantial drop in revenue for the government. And there has been dead money. You spoke about that. But somebody else spoke about a growth in investments. But the reality is that for quite a long time, if you compare with 2001, 2002, there is stagnant investment. I think that the economic rationale of many economists is to say, yes, things are going well, but in real terms, that's not the case. There is no direct correlation. So can you give me your comments? Mr. Schultz, perhaps you could begin, followed by Ms. Amsden.
Yeah, sure, and thank you for the question. And, I would like to maybe go back to the experience that we had in 2008, and particularly Alberta, where we had the provincial government make some changes in the royalty structures for oil and gas producers, which directly impacted the amount of rig activity that we saw and we were used to in prior years. I think the message that I'd like to say is that what investors are looking for, and certainly we benefit from that of investment. When investment is made, we go to work and we put people to work. And what we have seen is that when the government can put in place a stable and predictable regulatory regime, both on the taxation side as well as making sure that there's a clear process for regulatory review, that it benefits our operations. And we've seen where when governments do make...
I'll ask you to be short because I don't have much time.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we support a stable, competitive taxation
The follow-up
rate.
question I would quickly have for you is, do you consider that the current rate we have is concurrential?
Well,
it's competitive?
I think at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we are competitive vis-a-vis other jurisdictions.
My question is, are we currently competitive?
Well, I think we're moving in the right direction, which is making sure that we're competitive vis-a-vis other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Quickly, Ms. Amsden.
Number one, we recognize that we're talking about the deficit, and we do think that it needs to be brought down. We think we can reallocate from other areas rather than necessarily spending new. We do think that the general tax rate on corporations is competitive and that it will help us.
Thank you.
And in terms of where we do see some, quote, tax spending, where it could be reallocated is probably best known as the flow-through share concept, which could be moved from not moved from oil and gas, but it could be extended to biotech and green and high tech. That would actually create some new jobs and hopefully sustainable ones as well.
Merci. J'ai à peu près 30 secondes qui me...
Thank you. I guess I've got about 30 seconds left. Mr. Staples, you were speaking about new programs, the fighter plane programs, the F-35, and the C-18s have to be replaced. What would your response be to that?
Our position is that, yes, the CF-18s do need to be replaced. I think there's a question of timing as to how long we have left in them. We've spoken to national defense experts, retired generals or colonels who are responsible for the program, so there's actually quite a bit of life left in them, depending on how they're used. So we have time to look at other options and do a proper, competitive, open process, Mr. Carroll.
Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to welcome all the witnesses here this afternoon. It's great to see you, and your testimony is very important for sure. Unfortunately, we only get 5 minutes to talk, so we don't get to talk to everybody. I know I'd like to talk to Mr. Schultz and Ms. Amsden, but I just won't get time to get there, so we'll have to talk afterwards because your labor issues and some of the comments you made are definitely issues in Saskatchewan. Ms. Walmsley, I actually wanted to focus on you and some of the suggestions you made and your recommendations you made. One recommendation that kind of struck out a little bit was the list of stock exchanges. Can you give us some background information on how that list is created, and then how should that list be modified, and is there a process we need to be going through to see that list being currently updated all the time so it's always fluid instead of just being static and getting looked at every number of years?
Excellent question. We've been exploring this issue with the Department of Finance, both the background and options to keep the list up to date. I'm not clear on the actual history of the list today. What I am aware of is the process today to add exchanges to the list is very complicated. Foreign exchanges have to go through an application process and, in effect, prove their regulatory controls in place and prove their worthiness to Canada. The challenge with that is, as the committee I'm sure is well aware, Canadian tax law is not well known around the world. A lot of the exchanges that are not listed are in the emerging markets, and quite frankly, it just probably is not a priority in their mind to get on the Canadian list. To date, in the last 5 years, to my knowledge, there's only been 2 exchanges added to the list, Bermuda and the Canadian National Exchange. And so our recommendation to the government is both look at an alternative process because we don't think the current process is working and is not going to maintain the list. Looking at other third-party options to validate the process, whether they're IOSCO members, OECD, whether Canada has a signed tax treaty with the country. We think there is a lot of options to make the list more relevant. And I think my final point would be that right now the list, because we have a list, it almost it looks as though we are endorsing certain exchanges. And the exchange list is predominantly, as I said, Canada, U.S., and Europe. So our recommendation is we really have to make sure the list is kept modern, up to date, and to allow Canadians to diversify their retirement savings and to have options beyond the more traditional Western markets.
Okay, so, one thing this government's been very active on and very aggressive on is doing trade abroad and different types of trade agreements with different countries. Is this something that actually should be part of our trade deals that we should be looking at when we do a trade deal, for example, with Panama or Colombia, or as we look at TPP or CETA? Is that something that should
I think
be
that's certainly an option, because right now, if we are negotiating trade with a country that is their exchange is not on our list, Canadians cannot invest their RSPs in a equity that's on a foreign exchange in that country.
Now, another question then I have is, why should we even have a list? Why wouldn't we just allow anybody to go there?
That's a good question, and we've explored other countries whether a similar list exists. To our knowledge, we're not aware in the U.S., for example, whether there is a similar list of specific exchanges. So I believe that would be one option, just to eliminate having a list, because there is a risk the government is, in effect, endorsing certain exchanges. And the reality is, there is a due diligence process that any investor or any investment manager goes through, and it's just because a company is on a certain exchange does not necessarily make it an appropriate investment.
Okay. Ms. Aniston, was there anything you wanted to add to Ms. Wolf's comments?
We have it written on the same issue, and there are some things that could be done, we think, fairly quickly by accepting any exchange that is an OECD country, because you've got certain standards that are in application. I do think, I had never thought of it the way that you did, in terms of potentially that could be something we could give in a trade mission, as long as, of course, we're going to be getting some of the satisfactory answers in terms of the quality of the accounting and systems and so on behind it.
You talked about tax on professional management fees, the GST, in that portion. Why do you think you should be exempt? I have a hard time understanding that one.
I guess the argument would be, we're not necessarily recommending full exemption. We're suggesting potentially we turn the clock back to at least July 1st, 2010, and look at GST only, and that would eliminate the additional tax in all the harmonized provinces. The issue really comes down to the government has prioritized retirement savings and has addressed the fact that we need to do something to help Canadians save more. There's pension reform going on to help underfunded pension plans. Okay. This, we believe, is one form of helping Canadians have more capital, pay less tax at the time of saving, and have more retirement savings in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoback. Mr. McGinty, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais...
Thank you, Chairman. If you'll allow me, I'd like to return to Mr. Schultz for a minute now. His evidence was given, but he didn't have the opportunity to finish what he was saying about a national strategy on natural gas.
You were clipped off there with respect to a national, I think you were alluding to a natural gas strategy. Could you take maybe less than a minute just to walk us through what your thinking is in this regard?
Thank you very much, Mr. McGinty, on allowing me to talk a little bit about this. I think we have a huge opportunity here within Canada, where right now we have an abundance of natural gas, which is one of the cleanest burning fossil fuels. The price point for this fossil fuel is tremendous, and I think we should be encouraging the adoption of natural gas into the electrical power generation. I think we should be looking at incentives to look at converting the commercial trucking fleet to natural gas, where we can, frankly, from our perspective, we're drilling 80% of our wells are oil. And when we have fluctuations in the cost of oil, it certainly, and we don't really have much as an alternative to drill for. If we can provide some incentives on the supply side and the demand side of natural gas, I see a tremendous benefit for our industry, but also on the side for our attempts as a country to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, because that's certainly an incredibly important piece for Canada to pursue, which is our carbon emissions.
That's exactly where I wanted to take you next, Mr. Schultz. The American Chamber of Commerce's 21st Century Research Institute on Energy is now advising both political parties on Capitol Hill that the United States are going full steam ahead into natural gas, including shale gas and shale oil. The Chinese have found massive deposits of natural gas in the southwest. They're building pipelines to their cities on the eastern side of the country. And I wanted to ask you about the need to address natural gas. How do we do that if we don't actually have an adult discussion in Canada right now about a national energy strategy? For example, we don't know how fossil fuels will connect to renewables, which will connect to hydro, and connect to nuclear, connect to biofuels going forward. We don't know what the net effects of the existing fiscal measures in place are having on our energy future. We don't know what the programmatic expenditures are having on our energy future. And we certainly don't know how any of this is connected to Mr. Harper's promise to reduce greenhouse gases by 17% in absolute terms in the next 13 years. Now, we're way behind every other OECD country that we've looked at. How do we do a natural gas strategy in the absence of a more fulsome national examination of what's our energy future all about?
Tremendous point, Mr. McGinty. In fact, our association is extremely supportive of a national energy strategy. I think we need to look at, what does our energy mix looks like 10, 20 years down the road. I think natural gas is, from our perspective, a tremendous alternative to be pursuing, particularly with electrical generation. And, right now, I can give you an example on our rigs. We are, in fact, being extremely innovative with powering some of our equipment with natural gas and biofuel technology, whereby we can actually take some of the natural gas right from the wellhead to power our rigs. And that's, in fact, directly reducing our carbon footprint. And so we have to think critically on this. I agree. We need to sit down and have an adult conversation of how can we best utilize the abundance of natural resources on the natural gas side, and wind, nuclear, and all, hydro. But you're right, the conversation needs to happen.
Okay, about 45 seconds.
Time?
45 seconds.
Ms. Amundsen, very quickly, on the markets, you mentioned 60% of the TSX was effectively energy and financial services. What's going on in the markets right now when people make choices around investing in companies? And to what, in this sense, to what extent are they examining, for example, energy efficiency performance or overall sustainability performance, and do they have the metrics to do it?
I don't know if they have the metrics to do it, so that's the short answer. I think, do people care? I think people care, but how easy it is to have an actual measure that people will be able to check quickly and easily, I don't know that it's there. I'm interested enough in it myself till I'll follow up with you with what I can find out once I get back to my office.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGinty. Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was expecting to take the next round, but I'll gladly take this round. Thank you all for coming. Good to see you all. Mr. Schultz, I want to remind you about the National Energy Program that the Liberals introduced back in the 70s, and what a great sounding success that was. And I would like to say as well, too, that when we talk about a national energy program, we have gone far beyond that. I think as a government, we've proven that too. And I think you probably agree with that too, that when we talk about gas, we need markets. And especially the gas that you refer to in North BC, transportation is going to be the biggest issue. And the route that we are closest to, closer to anyone, of course, is the East, Japan, Korea, China. And Mr. McGinty is correct in saying that the Chinese have huge reserves. I think they're the second largest in the world. They still have to manufacture all those pipelines. So we have this window of opportunity, don't we, that we can. And one of the things that we have acted on, and again, I say, well, rather than talk about an energy program, we're already moving that direction, is the one project, one review. I wonder if you just comment on that, just tell us how important that is.
Yeah, and certainly, we're extremely supportive of the government's plans to, to streamline some of these major projects. I mean, I think everyone, including our industry and our association, is cognizant of the fact that we have to ensure that we're building these projects, bearing in mind the environmental sensitivities and ensuring that we're doing it as safely as possible. And so, but I think at the end of the day, I think there's a way to do that with some of the processes and streamlining initiatives that your government is proposing, and we're very much supportive of that. I mean,
and liquefied natural gas is the means of transportation to the Far East. And is there any other port other than the one in Louisiana presently in North America? And then how much closer are we to Louisiana from Kitimat, say?
Well, unfortunately, I'm gonna decline to comment on that. I'm not the expert.
About 7,000 miles. So.
I'm not an expert on that particular question. So I'll leave that up to another witness.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and we certainly are very encouraged with what's happening in the natural gas field. Mr. Daler, I want to speak to you. It's good to see you again. Yeah. You've mentioned that we've missed an opportunity. You've acknowledged this too, but I just want to mention that our government has, since 2006, invested more than $10 billion annually in students and education, including $3 billion in transfers to the provinces. Of course, the provinces administer education, and that's one of the things that we've heard repeatedly in a number of testimonies from different organizations in different fields, especially in the extraction industry, be that mining or the oil or gas, is the shortages that they are experiencing right now and the shortages that are looming in the future. What have we done wrong? Are we missing the boat? Are we not producing the people that we need for these areas? And where is the shortfall? Is there something that we can do federally maybe to coordinate a better plan with our post-secondary education?
Thank you for the question. I think really what's important is investing in education generally to get people educated. We're looking at, in a lot of cases, less jobs for people who are not going to school. In the recession, there were 433,000 fewer jobs created for those without an education. So when we're talking about labor gaps, from our perspective and from our members' perspective, whether that be pursuing university or college or specific trade, getting that individual in the door and ensuring that they're not leaving heavily indebted so that they can pursue work opportunities after.
I was just very quickly, I was more interested in, are we advertising enough the fact that we need expertise in the engineer in those fields? Is that something you're seeing at the higher levels of education?
We can always do more to advertise getting to education and the needs of our market and our labor that is out there. There is a lot of misinformation that is out there for students, and any steps that can be done to clean that up are positive.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Monsieur Mai, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll continue with Mr. Daler. You say, finding a job is one of the greatest challenges facing youth and students today. Yesterday, we had the Canadian Federation of Students come before this committee, and when we asked them, in the past 6 years, have things been better or worse for students, and they said it got worse. When we look at the rate of unemployment, which is double for youth, when we looked at student loans that are going up, what's your take on how things are going for youth and students?
Well, I think it's important to note in 2012, Canada's employment rate for students aged 20 to 24 was 63.2%. This was down from 67.4% in June 2011 and is the same value recorded in June 2009, which is the worst point of the most recent recession. So definitely for those young people in that 20 to 24 age group, who are still trying to pay for whatever the cost may be associated for university and college, it has gotten to be quite difficult. The other point to note that I think is key to this is summer earnings. If you look between 1977 and 2008, summer student employment averaged around 70%. in 2012, as I mentioned, the employment rate dipped again to 47.9% for that summer employment. So when students have the opportunity to work and not being in class, the jobs just aren't there. Then when they're in study, they're working more than ever before. I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that's a little bit backwards.
Thank you very much, and I wish I had more time because we understand a lot of issues and a lot of things the government is doing right now that is actually increasing the gap between the rich and the poor, and that also affects students. But unfortunately, I won't have time to go into that. For the Rideau Institute, you've been very critical of how the government has been handling the F-35, we call it fiasco. And you also mentioned the lack of transparency, lack of accountability. Maybe 30 seconds on that front. Like, what can the government do now to make things better?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions about where the government is on the 7 steps that they announced earlier this year. There's been some moving around of those priorities. They had a terrible time trying to find a firm that was going to provide some kind of independent analysis of this. We were very much looking forward to greater scrutiny of it at the, I think it was the Public Works Committee that was going to do it at the return of the sitting after the summer break. That was squelched. And right now there's been very little discussion of it over the last few months about what's happening in the Secretariat. And we just think there just needs to be much more oversight on this, and the government needs to be clearer. For instance, we've had ministers talk about a contract. There is no contract for the F-35. The price estimates have swayed dramatically, and they've had to change some of those estimates. But the public just doesn't know what's happening. There was a media report recently that quoted a Lockheed Martin registered lobbyist commenting on F-18s, but yet the media report didn't identify that he was in fact a registered lobbyist for Lockheed Martin. He was just presented as an expert, and the public is confused by that. That story ran across the country. We try to catch up and change it. But I think greater parliamentary oversight, which would inform MPs like yourselves and journalists, is really required on this file.
In your answers to the question regarding productivity, you say that, thank you, that Canada has become more, structural changes, that Canada has become more and more dependent on export of unprocessed resources.
Yes.
And also that, that Canadian companies need to add value to our exports. I think that's something that we've been pushing from our side too. Can you maybe expand more on that too? What can we do more on that front, and how it would benefit Canada?
Well, I think broadly, certainly an industrial strategy is required. I think the government has a role in assisting industry and making investments in key areas where we can do it, where we can do that. I think there's lots of areas where that can happen. My particular area is in the high-tech field of defense procurement, which involves a lot of aerospace aspects. And I think in particular, as I mentioned, the government is talking about doing a defense industrial strategy. That's not really the way to go at this point. As I mentioned, PwC is projecting defense expenditures across the globe are going down. Those countries that are still involved in major defense procurement, like the U.S., they're looking for jobs at home. They don't want to see F-35 jobs coming to Canada or Italy or other places. So let's look at the commercial side. Where we do defense procurement, let's make sure we have industrial regional benefits and make sure Canadian companies can compete. But let's focus on the commercial side. Bombardier's jets, I think, hold a lot more promise than fighters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would appreciate once again if you could let me know when I have 1 minute left in my questioning. I have questions for pretty much all of you, but I do have to narrow my focus in the spirit of time. Mr. Staples, I just have a quick question for you. Are you a registered lobbyist?
Yes.
And who do you lobby on behalf of?
The Rideau Institute is an NGO unto itself, so we are not a charity, and we do advocacy work for ourselves. So I am an in-house lobbyist for the Rideau Institute. I'm also a consultant lobbyist for other organizations. We've recently registered for the Communication, Energy, and Paperworkers Union, the Nobel Women's organization, which represents Nobel Peace Prize winners, mostly nonprofits and trade unions.
Trade unions, okay, thank you. Mr. Schultz, it's important to have a competitive tax system. And Canada is recognized around the world as having a very competitive tax system. That's why we're ranking #1 out of G8 countries in terms of economic performance. Our corporate tax rate is 15%. I'm really hoping that you could help the people across the way here understand that an increase in taxes would lead to less investment and less jobs in our country. Could you please explain, as a spokesperson for your industry, what higher taxes would mean on investment and job growth and economic prosperity for Canada?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Adler, for the question. And certainly what I will say is that I think we have to look at this as an overall competitive equation here. And certainly corporate taxes is important, along with personal taxes and royalties and fuel taxes. All of these things up, all these issues add up to an overall an investment decision for capital. And when the formula makes sense for an investor to put money in towards developing a oil and gas well, we go to work. When the formula doesn't work out and they say, look, compared to other jurisdictions, maybe it's better to invest in Texas or Alaska. I mean, there's a multitude of other jurisdictions where capital is moving, and certainly we want to be the jurisdiction that attracts that needed capital where we can put people to work.
So lower taxes are a key factor in that, correct?
That I would say, from a competitiveness standpoint, it's a huge benefit for our industry, for representing tens of thousands of workers, that we go to work when investors see a competitive tax climate in the country.
Would you consider the oil sands to be a disease, as the NDP says it is?
I do not consider the oil sands to be a disease. I see it as an opportunity for all Canadians. If we can do it in an environmentally and sustainable way, I think all Canadians from coast to coast can benefit from that tremendous resource. And we do see, I mean, in our industry alone, we do a lot of SAGD operations in the oil sands. And in fact, we employ Canadians right across this country. We were at a reception the other day where I was showing a picture of a rig crew that the derrick hand was from St. John's, Newfoundland. Our motor hand was from Quebec, and our driller was from Alberta. And I think it just is a statement that says that the oil and gas industry is a tremendous opportunity for all Canadians, and we all benefit from that.
Thank you. That's well said, and I hope my friends across the world learned something today. Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Now, I have a question for you, Mr. Schultz. I'm going to ask a couple of the others the same question. Knowing that you were going to be here today, did any one of your members, how many members do you have?
We have 45 drilling recontractors and 76 service recontracting.
Did any one of those say to you, please, Mr. Schultz, when you appear before the Finance Committee of the House of Commons today, we want you to tell them that we are in favor of a $21 billion carbon tax that the NDP is proposing? Did any one of those ask you to do that here today?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Amson, how many members do you have?
170.
Did any one of those ask you to advocate for a $21 billion carbon tax today as contained within the NDP party platform?
There were no comments on that subject.
Thank you very much.
Why would they? It's not true.
Check page 4 of your platform, sir.
Right?
Am I out of time? Well,
all right,
okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. We'll go to Mr. Marston, please, for your round.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to apologize to our guests here today. I mean, you come to this place expecting a level of debate that's commensurate with the work that you've put into it, and you have to listen to the politicking from the other side. Is beyond belief. Anyway, Mr. Staples, as a lobbyist, because that point was raised, and that's a fair point to raise. Quite often, as a lobbyist, you're actually seeking better legislation and not necessarily seeking money. The implication was that lobbyists are all out there to gain money. Is that a fair view?
No, I think that in my work here today, I'm here as the Rideau Institute. I'm here on behalf of our thousands of supporters out there that make regular monthly contributions to our organization.
My point is, in general, as a lobbyist, though, you work with NGOs,
Yes.
and actually you're looking for legislative changes as often as you may be looking for money.
Oh, yes. We're looking for policy or legislative changes, yes.
I just wanted to make the point because the implication was that we're talking about money here.
Right.
I also respect you for raising concerns about a military budget because the times we've lived in for the last 15, 20 years is not, people who do that are kind of questioned. But when you look at the graphs that we have here that you're showing us the last 15 years, it's more than doubled. And we've had very terrible times. There's no doubt of that. But your graphs, do they take into account any place the projections of the costs of the F-35?
No, they're just up until the current point. I think that one in particular goes to 2011.
Yeah, it does. So you've commented a little bit on the F-35. When you put it into the context of this change that's just happened where they've now got a committee, a procurement committee for oversight, and that's great. It's important that we have that as long as it's public in what they do. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think, first of all, it was a recognition that things weren't going correctly. I mean, you got to remember that this program was announced 2 years ago in 2010 with great fanfare at a point at which the plane itself was not proven. And in fact, you imagine they made that announcement 2 years ago. Well, this year, the plane only flew for the first time at night. I mean, that's how new that plane was. We now know it works in the dark. And also this year, it dropped its first bomb. So this is very much a model airplane that we've committed to, that the government has committed to. Now, it has created this committee, which I think is a recognition of the fact that the track it was on was incorrect. However, as you know, there's been very little evidence that actually this committee is looking at other alternatives at this point, which it was, my understanding was it was mandated to do.
Thank you. Mr. Scholz, you in your presentation you say your industry has 820 rigs. How many workers would that entail?
Well, I mean, you have to look at the service side. I mean, are you talking about just in our industry on the drilling side?
More directly in the industry.
So approximately we have on a crew would be about six individuals from our side that would be working on a single drilling rig. But then you also have to keep in mind that you're going to have pumpers, you're going to have wireline operators, et cetera. And the rule of thumb we always say is about for every rig that's working, it amounts to about 135 direct and indirect jobs.
So it's a major industry. I heard Mr. Daler speaking about the need for educating First Nations, and we've heard that from several witnesses here, that that's one of the stopgap measures that we can use for the jobs that we hear from Mr. Jean in his area that are so desperately looking for people to fill. Does your industry use temporary foreign workers to any degree?
It's very rare that we have some companies that have tried it, but for the most part, it makes sense for us because we look at this as a long-term career opportunity for people. And we would much rather train and nurture a Canadian and bring them up in the industry and work them up on the rigs than we would ever see the need for temporary foreign workers.
Well, I appreciate that because we do have an awful lot of Canadians looking for work. Would you support the government giving assistance to unemployed Canadians to move, to be able to go to the areas where the jobs are? We've heard that in other presentations.
In fact, it was something that I was asking for in my presentation. We would be extremely supportive of that because, again, we have regions of our country that have folks that are unemployed, and we'd love to bring them out and train them up and put them to work.
Well, that would be a major investment for sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Marston. Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their presentation today. And I think I'd like to start with Mr. Daler. And the first thing, I think it's, certainly most people recognize the critical importance of education and also in terms of the Aboriginal community. Now, it's interesting you're asking for the lifting of the 2% cap. I did have a meeting yesterday with some other folks in my office, and what they were saying, and I thought it was a very interesting concept, and I'd be very interested in what you heard about it, is there's some significant research out of the University of Victoria, which of course is very well known for the work that they're doing, and saying, you know what, it is more important right now to look at support versus funding, and that if you're looking at how you can help create success, that there's some measures that would help increase the retention rate. So I guess my first question is, if you had only limited resources, which is the better avenue in terms of, and are you aware of this particular study and what the implications and the ramifications are?
I could not comment directly on this study right now, but in terms of support versus just financing, I think you can't just throw funding at an issue and not put the support there, whether that be on-the-ground support, actually on reserve, or wherever it may be through a friendship center, to help these young people get access to the appropriate information. I mentioned earlier, we did a study, the illiteracy of the literate, that showed that there's a good portion of misinformation out there about where to get the simple information about accessing, and then once you have that, then the funds come into it. 100%, this is an issue in terms of First Nations, Inuit populations with the PSSSP, to work with that community and with that group to identify what supports are needed, as well as what funding is there. When we look at it from, what we can do to increase our overall productivity, in our tax base, this is absolutely a population that needs both support and funding, so I'm not sure I can separate the two of them.
Okay, thank you. I mean, they were talking, and it was a very, very poor retention rate, and so I think to support success is a critical issue to be thinking of. My next focus, how many students graduate without debt?
The number on that varies. I've heard a number of things in terms of that. It's hard to say without debt because, private debt is not counted, loans from parents is not counted, loans from grandparents is not counted. When we're looking at that, if it's in 30 to 40% of students graduating without debt, I would be surprised if they didn't have any debt, whether that be credit card or whether that be private.
Okay. So there's this, because if I look through, and I was doing that, and so we know that a number of students graduate without debt. What percentage of the actual cost of education do students pay?
Do they actually pay in terms of their education?
So the costs, how much is actually funded by the institutional cost? So let's say a degree is X dollars, but they're only paying tuition of $7,000, and really the cost is $15,000. Is it 50%? What percent do they pay?
When you look at from the candidate, from the loans perspective, that's provided 60-40, but from what a student pays?
What a student pays of the actual cost of the education.
That can vary from institution to institution once you add in the fees. Across this country, you're looking at average year for a student being, when you calculate fees and living in books, $18,000 to $27,000.
But the tuition, so you don't have that number, tuition compared to the education costs?
I can find that for you.
That would be great. So as I do look through, and certainly I have every sympathy. I have 3 children who went through university, but I do see significant changes to the grant program, both for low and middle income, support for people with permanent disabilities, student grant for and equipment for disabilities, support for dependents. I look at the RESP and the Canada student grant that goes along with it. So has anyone added up all those costs together in terms of what the actual support is?
I couldn't give you the total number of support right now. There are absolutely a number of programs that are there to support students. As we mentioned, the Canada Student Grant Program is a fantastic way to put dollars that don't have to be repaid back to students. When you look at changes to the copyright legislation, modernizing that and including fair dealing, those are savings and investments in students, and everything helps. I would encourage, if you look at polling, education is in the kind of the top 4 issues. I think... Okay, thank you. Really, more investment is required to make it a number one priority for this country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chisholm, please.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for all the presenters. It's been very interesting listening to your thoughts and your ideas about things that need to be done. It's interesting whether you suggest it's as a result of the favorable corporate tax rates or an unwillingness to invest. But the governor of the Bank of Canada has also recognized that there's upwards of $500 billion sitting in cash in bank accounts that corporations are sitting on. The government to date appears unable to get that money out, to get it invested as it was intended for capital or for hiring or whatever. And I'm just wondering if you have some suggestions on what can be done, what incentives could be introduced, by what incentives government could use to try to get some of that money out and working in the economy. And I think you all have have some perspective on this issue from different points of view. So when we start with Stephen and head down the list.
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert in this area, but one would think that with the high Canadian dollar as it is, it's always been explained to me that this is an advantageous time to recommit into capital expenditures, to procure new equipment, to upgrade facilities in manufacturing. And perhaps the government has some way in terms of leveraging new technology and getting this money going, so that we have the investments in auto and manufacturing or aerospace or other areas where this dead money can become lively.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Walmsley?
Yes, that's a tricky question because I think the answer would vary by industry. And I think if there was specific industries the government maybe saw there was more cash reserves and there wasn't the investment happening, there may be some industry-specific opportunities to look at. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the sort of holding on to cash that's happening at the corporate level and the individual level is beyond our borders. I think post-U.S. election, a little more stability in Europe, a little more confidence globally in the economy is going to help, and I think certainly locally, Mr. Carney and the Bank of Canada's policy on maintaining interest rates has certainly helped in keeping the rate low to stimulate investment. But yeah, I think there's a limited amount we can do within Canada until the global economy situation is in a better position.
I've got a small one and a big one. I'll start with the small one. There was a tax change made in 2008 that inadvertently hurt small Western investment dealers, which was a tax change that made a great deal of sense, which was to tax traditional warrants on income, even if it hadn't been actually materialized. There's something called broker warrants out west, which is usually used instead of cash for some of our smaller Western members to invest in new opportunities. And so that instead of paying 100% cash for underwriting fees, you would take broker warrants and join in or participate in the potential growth. We don't think that costs a lot. It was inadvertent. We know that from having talked with finance, but it takes a lot of time to kind of reverse something. Mm-hmm. The other one that I mentioned before was these flow-through shares, where by directing them at new types of industries, the biotech and so on, we think that is a great area for both driving jobs, but also potentially getting our industries out of sort of energy and financial institutions only into new areas that could be that could really help growth more generally. And then there are a number of other areas that
45 seconds left, so
I'll give you the hard copy version later.
Okay, no, that would be good. I mean, because you'll agree, I think, and I'll go to Mr. Schultz next, that I mean, this is a problem. The governor said that this is just not good enough,
okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
There's about 30 seconds left for.
I'm not an expert on that question, so I'll pass on that. Answering.
I mean, it's one thing to say we've got a competitive tax rate, but if our tax rate is not having the kind of effects that it's supposed to, which is to get corporations to use those savings to invest in capital and labor. If it's not doing that, then it's not working, is it?
You best talk to Barbara on that question.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Taylor, we weren't able to get to you.
Do you want a very brief comment on that?
All I would say is less, we need more educated people with less debt. And before you can have capital and labor markets, you need an education.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jean, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Ms. Amston, tax revenues, corporate tax revenues have gone up, haven't they? In fact, the plan is working.
Certainly, from in terms of the reduction in the general corporate tax rate, yes.
And the tax revenues have gone up. We've seen an increase over this year over last year, even though the tax rate was different.
Correct.
I had a question for Mr. Taylor as well, and I noticed in reading your brief, you talked about addressing Canada's work shortage, and I'm not familiar if you're aware of the Alberta system, but I just wonder, in general terms, because I don't have much time, whether you agree with what I'm about to tell you, which is that they do aggressive marketing to students in high schools and implement programs with industry where high school students work part-time for industry and part-time in school, and they work together. Do you agree with that program?
I think there's a lot of good examples of where that works. Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, one of our member schools as well, finding out where those needs are. And
so you would agree with that?
We need to absolutely make better connections.
And you think we should do more of that across Canada? They should adopt that particular system as far as integrating school, industry, and with jobs?
Wider consultation would probably need to be had on the way to implement it, but building a better connection for sure.
And I noticed your organization hugely agreed with applauded our investments in the knowledge infrastructure program across the country, the federal investment never done before in provincial jurisdictional schools to that degree. Would you?
I think any investment that's made in the infrastructure is positive because it creates a better learning environment. But at the same time, you can't forget the student side of it. And
more is always better. Yeah. We hear that a lot. Mr. Schultz, I'd like to talk to you. I also noticed, and Mr. Marston's not here now, but in your brief you talked about some things that Mr. Marston's always been interested in, encouraging workers by moving EI, using the EI system, considering travel tax credits, and just relocating workers and encouraging them to the EI system. Your industry, in particular, would like that kind of thing to be moved forward more aggressively. Is that true?
Well, we have a systemic labor problem in Western Canada, and there are just not enough people to run our operations. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Now, do you agree with the Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance and their proposals, as well as the Liquefied Natural Gas Organization? One suggested that for LNG facilities, tax reclassification from 47 to 43, which would give them the encouragement to build a facility in Canada. Does your organization applaud that?
Anything that we can do to encourage drilling for natural gas is good for our association
and to refine the final product.
Absolutely.
And the Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, they talk generally about a form of natural gas highway in Canada to compare to the United States. Would you agree with that as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to talk about something that you mentioned, and that is the market diversification. Right now we export 99.9% of our oil to the United States. We import actually 770,000 barrels per day. We export 21.3 million barrels per day. The 777,000 barrels per day, do we pay full market price for that?
And that would be in Eastern Canada, absolutely.
Yeah,
and in some cases, you're paying Brent.
Exactly. And in fact, we sell our 21.3 million barrels a day to discount to the United States, actually between 30 and 40%.
It's a huge revenue loss for industry and government.
In fact, the revenue loss is about $41 million per day. Would that be about right?
My
calculation is
I'll agree with your calculation and the premise of the statistic that you're showing.
Okay. In fact, yes. I mean, it's pretty amazing that we buy oil in Eastern Canada for full price, and we sell oil to the United States for a 20 to 40% discount. Now, do you know why that is?
I think it's because we obviously have a lack of infrastructure that would be able to supply the various markets in Canada.
And the Northern Gateway Pipeline would solve a big part of that problem, wouldn't it?
Well, the Northern Gateway Pipeline would allow us to get international pricing for our commodities, and that certainly is going to be beneficial to all Canadians.
So all of a sudden we have $41 million a day more income across this country a day. You're nodding your head in agreement.
that we can put into different social programs and other things that run our country.
Build a lot of schools and hospitals.
Absolutely.
In fact, our oil production is going to double over the next 15 years. So we're not just talking $41 million a day. We're talking $100 million a day if we don't do something. Just because right now they're discounting it 20 to 40%, but when we're doing double the amount of production, they're going to discount it even more, aren't they? Because they're in control of the price.
Well, in particular, if the United States becomes energy sufficient and secure, that certainly is going to be a huge problem for Canadian crude producers.
If we build this pipeline, we're going to see some real revenue increase, which $18 billion was paid to governments last year in taxes alone by the oil industry.
At the end of the day, I think diversifying and getting multiple customers for your product just makes sense.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jean. I'm going to take the next round here as the chair. I wanted to just want to follow up. Quick question following up on Ms. McLeod for Mr. Daler. Do you have a view as an organization or as an individual? What percent generally the student should pay, and what percent generally the general taxpayer should pay? Do you have sort of advice for us on that?
I think that's going to vary depending on who you talk to.
But do you sort of have a suggested optimum, like between
as much as can be funded? It should be funded for students to get them through
by the general taxpayer. Okay. I did want to follow up on the money in corporations issue. It's a very lively political discussion around this topic that Mr. Chisholm was raising. So, Ms. Amson, I'm not going to sort of take up my time here today, but if there's anything further on that, sort of analysis from your association or Ms. Walmsley as well, we'd certainly appreciate that as a committee. It's a real pleasure to see Precision Drilling in the room. They have a big facility in Nisku in my area, and it's nice to sort of see the connection between the oil and gas sector and then all the resulting economic spin-off. But I did want to follow up just briefly on the gas issue. I was at actually a rig, one of Precision's rigs in northeastern BC a couple of years ago. The reality is with gas prices being so low, what kind of incentives could you actually do either on the upstream side, mainly on the upstream side, to actually encourage more drilling? Until that price sort of rises substantially. Now, on the downstream, I take your point, and I think Mr. Jean's absolutely right in terms of conversion. You could do incentives for vehicles and that. But on the upstream side, what could we do to incent more drilling in that area?
Yeah, and those types of questions are the reason why I had brought some industry experts. So, Doug, do you want to just maybe
quickly address that? Just introduce yourselves and
my name is Doug Strong with Precision.
Sit down, and so the interpreter can get you.
I think within the oilfield service sector, the macro situation corrects itself over time. The cycle itself, the great equalizer is depletion. Wells do deplete, so it is a self-correcting model and cycle. I think, as Mark mentioned, the big thing for us is around people and employment, and really preparing the workforce to be highly educated and trained, and where it's a viable career option, not a cyclical style of business. So I think the biggest impact we can have on the upstream side would is to focus on the people side of it. And it's traditionally a young person's industry and opportunity. And I think there's tremendous alliances with a lot of the issues that we discussed today.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I did want to just touch on a couple more issues in my time remaining. The national regulator, I take both your association's comments very seriously on that. And I think with the change of the position of provincial government of Alberta on this, I think there could be an opening on this. I did want to follow up, though, with Ms. Amsden on your responses to the questions with respect to conversion, moving the conversion from RSP to RIF from 71 to 73, removal of the minimum annual withdrawal limit from RIFs, and elimination of the RSP RIF income from the GIS clawback. Can you just make your arguments here for those recommendations you did make to the committee?
I think that the real reason for that is we have an aging population. We have people that are living longer. We have people, once you get to a certain age, the likelihood that you're going to continue until much older is much higher. And therefore, we need to allow people to take the money out more slowly than they have in the past. It's been since, I think, 1991, since there was a change from, I think, 67 to 71 a number of years ago. But in terms of how much you must take out once you're in a RIF situation, it hasn't really changed for quite some time, at least since 1991.
And do you have any costing on any of these proposals to share with us either
No,
today
we had
or?
tried to do some, and we'll go back into it. It's definitely not going to be costless, but it should be something it has to be something that's looked into over time. And in fact, the government, when the 2008, when there was that crash, in fact, there was the government allowed a 25%, I think, redeposit into the RIFs of some individuals, because if you have to start taking it out when it is a bad time in the market, you are doubly hit.
Okay. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
I'm very strict on others' time, so I'll be strict on my own. We appreciate you being here, responding to our questions. If there's anything further you'd like us to consider, please do submit it to the clerk. Just before I suspend, colleagues, you've been distributed 2 motions for 2 respective budgets, one for our pre-budget consultations and one for our study on Bill C-377. Are there any questions related to these budgets? No. Can I ask someone to move, first of all, the pre-budget consultation motion? Moved by Mr. Hoback. All in favor? That was a resounding yes, I saw. Yes. Thank you. All opposed? That's carried. And can I ask someone to move the motion on Bill C-377? Mr. Jean? All in favor? All opposed? Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Okay, colleagues, we will suspend for a couple of minutes. Keep your visiting to about a 5-minute break, and then we'll bring the next panel forward. Thank you. this meeting back to order, and I will welcome our new panel to the desk, and we have two guests from Calgary from video conference. I'll just check the sound. Can you hear me okay in Calgary?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, thank you. We have 5 organizations presenting during this panel session. We have, first of all, the Canadian Association of Social Workers. We have the Canadian Renewable Fuels Association. We have the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. And from Calgary, by video conference, we have the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, and we have Small Explorers and Producers Association of Canada. Thank you all for joining us here today. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we'll have questions from members. And we'll start with Mr. Phelps, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'd first like to thank the Standing Committee on Finance for the privilege of today presenting the views of the membership of the Canadian Association of Social Workers that will hopefully serve to inform the direction and decisions of Budget 2013. The Canadian Association of Social Workers exists to promote the profession of social work in Canada and advance issues of social justice. As highlighted in our pre-budget submission to the Standing Committee of Finance, CSW is committed to reducing the growing income inequality gap in Canada, and social workers are seriously concerned that legislation and policies recently adopted by the Government of Canada may run contrary to this objective. To this end, CSW strongly recommends a reversal of the gradual increase of the eligibility to old age security from 65 to 75, and an investment of an additional $400 million on top of the $300 million per year committed in Budget 2011 in support of seniors solely reliant on old age security and guaranteed income supplement to live with deserved dignity and respect. Social workers do recognize that the Government of Canada has taken some very useful initiatives in the recent budgets and economic plans to increase employment and job creation through the apprenticeship tax credits, foreign credential recognition, and targeted initiatives for older workers. In terms of challenges being faced and addressing these challenges, CSW commends the Government of Canada on the delivery of Changing Directions and Changing Lives, the mental health strategy for Canada, and now seeks the commitment of the Government of Canada to see its recommendations realized into action in order to increase productivity in Canada. With national leadership and provincial partnerships, it is possible to implement a coordinated national strategy for mental illness and mental health in Canada. Consequently, CSW fully supports the solutions grounded in the recommendations of the government's own National Mental Health Strategy for Canada, including increasing the proportion of health spending that is devoted to mental health from 7 to 9% over 10 years, increasing the proportion of social spending that is devoted to mental health by 2 percentage points from current levels, setting up an innovation fund to assist provinces and territories in developing a sustainable mental health infrastructure across Canada, and finally, ensuring the 5 key principles of the Canada Health Act be applied fully and formally to mental health services, as they are critical to achieving equity between mental health and general health services. Social workers firmly believe that the Government of Canada also has a critical role to play when it comes to funding health and health care, as well as developing accountability and equity in the delivery of social services beyond the announced 6% annual increase to the health transfer and the 3% annual increase to the social transfer through to 2017. As the 5th largest provider of health care in the country, the Government of Canada has the opportunity and some would say the obligation to both lead by example in areas of direct federal responsibility, as well as to coordinate shared accountability through the Canada Health Transfer and Social Transfer. CSW recently released a comprehensive report on the Canadian Social Transfer aimed at bringing attention to the lack of accountability inherent in receipt and delivery. The Canadian Social Transfer Project and Accountability Matters report outline recommendations on renewing accountability for the billions transferred annually from the federal to provincial governments in support of social services, childcare, and post-secondary education. The Canadian Social Transfer is inarguably a largely unconditional transfer, which has no accountability measures for ensuring the level of adequacy with respect to social programs across Canada. Given that recent budgets and the consequent implementation bills have been used as a mechanism to recognize changes in broad areas of legislation, policy, and regulations, CSW recommends that the accountability crisis inherent in the current model of financing social programs through the Canada Social Transfer be addressed in this next budget. Thank you for your time and listening to the perspective of social workers, and I look forward to responding to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Thurlow, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good evening. On behalf of the Canadian Renewable Fuels Association, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you here today. CRFA members and supporting organizations provide Canadians with renewable, clean-burning ethanol and biodiesel, fuels that help fight climate change and combat pollution like smog. At the same time, our members provide the platform to develop the next generation of biofuels. With the committee's questions in mind, I would like to move directly to our recommendations. Given the current climate of fiscal restraint, the CRFA understands it has become increasingly vital to ensure existing economic programs continue to be efficient and are achieving their desired goals for economic growth and job creation. Over the past decade, government programs and grants supporting renewable fuels productions have created some 14,000 full-time jobs and billions of dollars in economic activity. The Eco-Energy for Biofuels program, which has been a central element of this government's renewable fuel strategy, is one that I would like to highlight. Encouragingly, this program has shown to be highly effective at generating industrial expansion and job creation in Canada's ethanol industry. However, in terms of renewable diesel, there is more work to be done. To this end, we believe modest changes to the program are necessary to ensure that the objective of building out 600 million litres of biodiesel production can be met. Specifically, the CRFA recommends the government reopen the Eco-Energy for Biofuels program for Renewable Diesel Fund to new project applications and require existing program projects which were not substantially completed by September 30th cutoff date to reapply. As detailed in our submission, we would also like to see attached conditions to new applications to demonstrate their viability. I want to be clear that our recommendations are in no way intended to detract from the tremendous help the government's Eco-Energy program has been in creating a vibrant and competitive biofuel production industry in Canada. However, the unfortunate reality is that the contribution agreement period for biodiesel has elapsed, and only one new biodiesel plant has been constructed as a result of the program. I think it's important to emphasize that these modest adjustments would require no new federal dollars. We believe that the funds committed in previous budgets can be directed to shovel-ready projects that are prepared to move forward in Canada today. Doing so could generate more than 1,350 direct and indirect jobs and could contribute almost 400 million additional litres of new production capacity to the Canadian market by the end of 2014. Expanding Canada's biofuels industry creates jobs and environmental benefits that all Canadians can profit from. This is why the government must continue to ensure that the right conditions are in place to drive innovation and attract job-creating investment dollars to Canada. We have seen the success of an operating incentive as part of an integrated strategy aimed at stimulating the creation of ethanol plants, and believe that the same support for next-generation ethanol projects would provide the security needed to attract private capital investment during the critical commercialization phase. For this reason, CRFA proposes an operating incentive of 15 cents per litre for next-generation ethanol projects, which can be funded directly by using the unused ethanol money remaining as part of the Eco-Energy for Biofuel programs, which we estimated at approximately $50 million. Here, we are asking for previously allocated funds for ethanol to be redirected to benefit next-generation ethanol producers. Another area of vital interest to our industry is Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Our members have relied heavily on programs like the STDC Next Gen Biofuels Fund. And while there is no doubt that the global recession has slowed the development of some exciting technologies, there continues to be considerable advancement by the Canadian renewable fuels industry. It is our understanding that over 60% of the $500 million allocated in the Next Gen Biofuels Fund is already committed, and that many project announcements are imminent. Moreover, by the end of this year, we understand that the fund will be almost 80% committed. Knowing that the program was originally designed to run until 2015 and pay out beyond 2017, I would posit that we are on the right track. Not everyone shares that view, however. Despite planned investments and commitments from the SDTC board, some stakeholders from other sectors have asked the government and this committee to recommend the reprofiling of the program fund sector into other areas outside of the renewable fuels sector. Regardless of what others may suggest to you, those funds are not idle. The CRFA believes that it would be a mistake to reposition these already committed funds at this critical time, and that doing so would send a very negative message to innovators, private investors, and Canadian clean tech entrepreneurs. We recommend that the fund and the qualification for applicants be preserved as is. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the Canadian renewable fuels industry, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Sinclair, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for allowing us to make our recommendations on the 2013 budget. I'd also like to acknowledge the efforts of our local MPs, Minister Goodyear, Harold Albrecht, Peter Brade, Stephen Woodworth, who great guys, yeah, absolutely. Who every year for the last number of years have also conducted pre-budget hearings back in our riding, our community of Waterloo Region with all the different interests. And, of course, for an organization like ours that isn't based in the immediate Ottawa area or close to provincial capital, our relationship with the MPs and MPPs is critical. So, again, we were very fortunate to have excellent representatives. So we thank them for their ongoing support and their participation in the annual budget process. It is a lot of work. I'm going to be brief in my comments. I have prepared speaking notes, but in the interest of ensuring that all the points are made, I'm going to condense my presentation somewhat. First issue I'd like to raise the accelerated capital cost allowance for manufacturers. Our region, Waterloo Region, is still home to a number of manufacturing organizations, approximately 1,500 manufacturers employing 55,000 people. It's still, the manufacturing industry is still a very viable component of the southwestern Ontario economy. Still employs a lot of people, pay a lot of municipal taxes, provincial taxes, federal taxes. In past submissions to this committee, we have been supporters of the government's accelerated capital cost allowance for manufacturing and processing. It was brought in by Minister Flaherty in 2007 as a one-year measure, and has been extended a number of times since then. We concur with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters who have proposed that, in fact, this particular initiative be made a permanent fixture of the tax system, so we would support that. This is a measure that probably provides about $500,000 a year to Canadian manufacturers to invest in new equipment. I think academic reports and other analyses that have been conducted on the manufacturing sector keep referring to productivity. And this money is used for productivity enhancement to make Canadian manufacturers more competitive, more efficient, more productive. So again, we would support having that particular measure made permanent. The second point that we would like to advance is, as many of you in Ontario are aware, 4 years ago, Minister Flaherty announced the Southern Ontario Development Fund, which evolved into the FedDev Ontario, which has been operational since August 2009. It was a 5-year, originally intended as a 5-year program, $1 billion. We're 3 years, or 60% through the program. Meeting with a number of stakeholders of our community partners throughout Waterloo Region and southwestern Ontario. There is a lot of support for this program. It's provided some valuable funding to start-up businesses in our community in Waterloo Region, primarily young, growing firms in the IT sector. But I think it's provided a lot of assistance to a lot of stakeholders, municipalities, universities throughout the southern Ontario. So we would like to see this program extended in some form beyond the original 5-year mandate. The third point we'd like to bring forward, and this was something that was brought forward in the previous panel by Ms. Walmsley, and that is pooled registered pension plans. We are, as a chamber, also highly supportive of this initiative. And as Ms. Walmsley said, to make this program successful, it requires the support of the provincial governments as well, the provincial finance ministers. We have written to Ontario Finance Minister Dwight Duncan, and his indication was the province of Ontario is reviewing this measure. However, they would be in further contact with their federal counterparts. So our message to the federal government is our business community, I think the business community across Canada supports this program, and that would be the message that we would like the federal government to take forward in negotiations with provinces, is that there is support among the business community for this program. Certainly we have a lot of small businesses that are members of the Chamber of Commerce in our area, and they have told us that there aren't a lot of options that they have available, viable, cost-effective options that they can offer to their employees in terms of retirement plans. So this addresses a lot of their concerns. So we very much would like to see the provinces get on side, particularly the province of Ontario. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present our recommendations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinclair. I think we'll now hear from the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, please.
Hello there.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. My name is Ben Vernon, Director of Policy and Government Affairs, Chief Economist with Calgary Chamber. Calgary Chamber represents about 2,200 businesses of within the Calgary region. And I'm speaking today on their behalf as we assist you in creating the best environment for Canadians to live, work, invest, and raise a family. My remarks today are based on three main themes from our pre-budget submission: principled expenditure management, employment insurance amendments, and enhanced foreign investment rules. From a principled expenditure management perspective, with a favorable debt to GDP level and reasonably strong economic growth, Canada is the envy of the developed world. However, the risk of a global recession is higher than it's been since 2008. As such, we cannot be complacent. The Chamber urges the federal government to apply prudent fiscal management policies to program expenditures, positioning Canada for stable long-term growth. This approach is beneficial in that it establishes future spending parameters in the context of the current fiscal climate and spending constraints. It also sends a credible signal to the business community that the federal government is committed to returning Canada to balanced budgets. The Chamber suggests that the government adopt a bandwidth approach to spending by targeting expenditure increases within a range delineated by population and inflation growth and real GDP and inflation growth, also known as our smart spending bandwidth. We presented on this previously as well. This range is between 2.6 and 3.0% for 2013-14 using a 5-year average. Secondly, I'd like to talk about amendments to federal employment insurance. With demographic pressures and a strong investment climate, labor shortages are expected to be a long-run concern for the Canadian economy and a top priority for Calgary Chamber members. The Chamber suggests that the federal government introduce amendments to the EI program so that it is structured as a true insurance program similar to your car insurance. The social program aspects should be moved to other programs but still funded, similar to the Quebec government's Quebec Parental Insurance Program. This restructuring of the EI program would facilitate the reduction of EI premiums, thereby reducing real wage costs to employers and increasing the real wages received by employees, creating a stronger link between amount paid and benefits received. We also encourage the federal government to adopt a variable premium payment program for the EI system, based on the program's 58 established economic regions. Essentially, areas of consistently high unemployment and corresponding high benefits.
I apologize for interrupting. We're just having a problem with translation. I believe it's too fast. Too fast? Yeah, if we could just ask you to slow down just a touch for the translation, please.
Oh, my word count per minute, though, was efficient to 5 minutes. How are we going to fix that?
I'll give you 5 minutes and 10 seconds.
We also encourage the federal government to adopt variable premium payments for the EI program based on the program's 58 established economic regions. Areas of consistently high unemployment, correspondingly higher benefits paid, would pay relatively higher premiums, and vice versa. This would eliminate the implicit redistributive properties of the EI program that discourage employers and employees from finding solutions to chronic unemployment challenges and facilitate labor mobility. Our end goal is to improve the labor market and reduce distortions in the job market, ultimately positioning Canada for a more competitive and economic prosperous future. Finally, I'd like to talk about enhanced foreign investment rules. Expanding trade agreements and encouraging foreign investment in Canada is critical to our long-term prosperity. A recent focus on foreign interest in the Canadian energy sector has once again called into question Canadian government policy regarding foreign investment and acquisition of Canadian resources by foreign investors. In the last decade, approximately half of all merger and acquisition activity in Alberta's oil sands involved foreign companies, and that's a value of $30 billion. Foreign investment is particularly critical for the oil sands because of the capital-intensive nature of the industry. Without it, there could be as much as 40% less oil sands investment in our province. With Alberta recognized as having among the largest proven oil reserves in the world, foreign interest in the oil sands is increasingly coming from emerging economies, particularly in Asia, whose growth trajectories suggest a long-term insatiable demand for energy. However, Canada needs to update the Investment Canada Act in order to be able to respond and embrace foreign investment in our country. The recent decision to postpone the $6 billion Petronas takeover of Progress Energy has raised concerns around the clarity of the net benefit test and the interest regarding state-owned companies in Canadian natural resource assets. Looking ahead, the proposed $15 billion acquisition of Nexen by state-owned CNOOC is likely only the beginning of a long line of potential foreign takeovers of Canadian energy assets. The Calgary Chamber is asking the federal government to undertake a comprehensive standalone review of the 1985 Investment Canada Act. This review, we recommend it be separate from the Budget Implementation Act and provide a broad and fulsome public debate. Specifically, we'd like to see the government clarify the net benefit test as outlined in Section 20 of the Act to streamline the wording and prioritize and focus the essence of the test and establish parameters therein. We also recommend including parameters around reciprocity in the net benefit test, increase substantially the threshold at which the federal government is legislated to undertake a review, improve the transparency of decisions so third parties considering deals can assess their chances at meeting requirements, and set specific criteria for state-owned companies to meet net benefit requirements in order to protect the Canadian economy from potential foreign government interference. The current challenge for investors and Canadian companies is that nobody knows exactly how the rules will be applied in their particular case or how they should interpret the Act and what they can do better in the future. Thank you very much for inviting the Calgary Chamber to present to the House of Commons Finance Committee, and I look forward to responding to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from Mr. Leach, please, your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Rajat, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting our association to speak with you. My name is Gary Leach, Executive Director of the Small Explorers and Producers Association of Canada. On January 1st, by the way, we'll simplify our name to simply the Explorers and Producers Association of Canada. We brand ourselves as the home of Canada's oil and gas entrepreneurs. Our membership is 300 companies. These are oil and gas companies that started here in Canada. They're headquartered in Canada, and they invest here in Canada. These member companies of our association contribute to the Canadian economy each year in new investments, some $6 to $8 billion invested in new oil and gas and oil sands production facilities. This sum, by the way, is equivalent to the entire value of all building permits issued each year in the Greater Toronto Area. So while you can see all the condos and office towers and industrial buildings going up in the Toronto area, you don't see the same visual image from our investment in the country because ours goes underground rather than up. But I hope it gives you some idea of how much our association members are investing in this country each year, contributing to the economy and sustaining tens of thousands of well-paying jobs, primarily in rural areas of Canada. In fact, a strong Canadian natural gas resource sector has been one of the main pillars of our nation's relatively strong performance compared to other G7 economies. The oil and gas industry alone is the largest by far private sector investor in the nation and has become Canada's largest export industry by value. As you may know, the upstream sector generates annual top-line sales of $100 billion per year and reinvests each year more than half that amount. There is no other industry in the country that remotely approaches the level of investment in Canada of the oil and gas industry. We think it's time to let the private sector drive the nation's economic growth while Ottawa focuses on reducing its deficit spending and withdrawing stimulus that it's introduced to the economy in the last few years. We think the federal government has done the right thing to reduce corporate tax rates because we think this will draw more investment by the private sector, helped along by those provinces that choose to align their tax regime with the federal one. And this investment will lead to more jobs and higher wages for Canadians. However, the wealth that can be generated for Canadians from coast to coast by our oil and gas industry, whether you measure that in well-paid jobs or taxes or royalties paid to government, is seriously impaired by our lack of access to markets outside North America. This reduces the value of Canada's energy exports by tens of billions of dollars per year. We only get to sell a barrel of oil one time, and if we don't get the best price for that barrel when it's sold, the opportunity is lost forever. We therefore support the goal of streamlining the project review process in Canada, particularly for major pipeline infrastructure projects. Canadians are quite capable of conducting project reviews with thorough consideration of environmental, social, and economic impacts in a reasonable time frame. We don't need 10 years to conduct a review of a project like the Mackenzie Valley Gas Pipeline, which didn't survive the review process. 10 years doesn't add anything to the knowledge base that couldn't have been learned in 2 or 3 years in a properly managed process. Businesses investing in Canada are entitled to a government review process that's efficient, effective, and has a decision point within a reasonable period of time. We also endorse continuing steps by Ottawa to reduce the burden of too much regulation and red tape that's imposed by government on small business. I'm sure many of you know that trying to understand and comply with overly complex regulation is far more costly per employee for small business than large ones, and a recent survey suggested thousands of small business owners in Canada said they would not have started their business if they had realized how much time was spent dealing with government instead of keeping their customers happy. For small and mid-sized oil and gas companies, a serious additional challenge is raising enough capital to fund their growth plans. This has particularly been the case since the financial market crisis of 2009 and has been made worse by weak natural gas prices and the heavy discount that I referred to a few minutes ago that Canadian oil sells for in the North American market. The amount of equity financing raised for Canada's oil and gas industry is down 44% this year to the midpoint of the year compared to the first half of 2011, dropping to just over $4 billion from a $7 billion record raised in the first half of last year. The amount of money borrowed for oil and gas investment has increased 25% over that same time period.
Mr. Leach.
However, the $4.1 billion in equity financing raised in Canada so far this year, about $104 million, a little over 2%, was from the issuance of flow-through shares.
Mr. Leach, if I could get you to just wrap up very briefly, and then we'll go to members' questions. I know you get a lot of questions on this, but we are just running very short on time here. So.
All right. I just wanted to say that I spoke about flow-through shares. The Finance Department has recognized flow-through shares as an important financing mechanism for smaller oil and gas companies. We have 2 recommendations. Increase the annual Canadian Development Expense conversion limit to $4 million from $1 million, and increase the taxable capital test to access the conversion to $50 million. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my remarks, and I'm, of course, happy to answer questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions avec M. Caron pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much all for your presentation. I concentrate my question on Mr. Brunin and maybe Mr. Sinclair. Mr. Brunin, especially as an economist, I'm an economist myself, so I'm really interested in macroeconomics, especially. There are many issues I would like to tackle. I'll try to do it within the 5 minutes that's allocated. In terms of productivity, we've been seeking to try to increase Canadian productivity for a long time. I still remember the free trade debates where we were told that the gap between Canadian and U.S. productivity could be reduced or will be reduced thanks to the agreement. Yet the gap never really got any slimmer between both countries, and the issue of Canadian productivity has been a problem since forever, I think. And we're looking at many ways, either investments in research and development or so on, to try to improve on productivity, but nothing seems to work. So my first question, and then we'll have a second question before I give you a chance to answer, is why can't we seem to find a real solution on the issue of productivity, regardless of the prescription that is being either given or being implemented by government? The second point relates to taxation. I'm talking about increasing taxes. The question is that, especially in the corporate sector, taxation has been reduced significantly since 2000. And even since 2006, since we have this current government, the time I think the rate was 22%, now it's 15%. And the main argument for it is that if we are reducing tax rate, then that money will actually be reinvested and will actually be growth in the economic growth in general, which makes sense. Except that in reality, we all heard about that money. Even Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of Canada, has mentioned it. And we also have a problem where if we're looking at the real investment rate in this country since 2000 and since 2006, it's been pretty flat. So we don't necessarily see that money going into real investments or into investments in real terms. So I just wanted to know why do you think that is, and if you think that prescription has actually fulfilled all the potential that its promoters actually put forward.
You want to start with it?
Sure, definitely. Go to the first sections there, and we can need clarity on that second part of your question. Perhaps we can get into that. Productivity, where we're talking about strengthening productivity. Basically, you've solved it in 5 minutes, right? That's the reality is what I'm calling for right now. We're looking at expanding trade agreements as a means to enhance productivity. We see that as beneficial for a number of reasons, but as in our budget submission that we made to you, there's actually a citation from StatsCan when they presented to the Standing Senate Committee, and basically found that businesses that export have increased their productivity as they entered export markets, grew much more rapidly after doing so, and introduced new technologies more quickly. Basically, what we see in this regard from a productivity perspective is accessing new markets creates access to new ideas, new technologies, new business sectors, those types of things. And at the end of the day, creates more competition. And I think competition drives productivity very effectively. I think one of our challenges from a productivity perspective right now, traditionally and not in recent years, has been that low Canadian dollar. There's a little bit of complacency from a productivity perspective as a result that we can just rely on our currency position. That's changed a little bit, and I think that you'll see a bit more of an enhancement in productivity as a result of necessity in that regard. Deregulation, ICT investment, and competition in that sector will enhance that as well. But opening up new markets, I think, is the fundamental key to doing that, because then we're able to bring in some competition, understand issues a little bit more, and innovate, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Just because I would like to hear Mr. Sinclair as well, and I got like 45 seconds for him. Maybe if you can actually address the corporate tax aspect of my question.
Yeah. Generally, with respect to the agenda of the current government, with respect to corporate tax cuts, I believe Minister Flaherty brought in a package in 2007, the fall economic statement in 2007, that's extended over a number of years. Our general, on behalf of our members, I think our approach is stay the course, that we're probably at a fairly competitive level. I would also say for the province of Ontario, I'll give them credit, have done some significant corporate tax cuts as well, and I think in the province of Ontario, we're in a pretty competitive position right now.
The question very quickly, just to restate the question, is why didn't it have an impact on the investment rate, per se? Because that was the reason why it was brought forward.
We'll have to come back to this, but it is a big issue, so we will come back to it in future rounds, I'm sure. We'll go to Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Caron for allowing Mr. Brunin to recite the conservative trade policy and the successes of it. I also noticed from your brief that you also talked about pursuing reciprocal arrangements bilateral on our bilateral trade agreements. And are you referring specifically to the reciprocal enforcement legislation found in the U.S., for instance, in their wine export-import laws between states?
I'm not referring to that because I'm not familiar with it. I'm referring basically to the concept of ensuring when we do engage in these types of arrangements that there's equal access or comparable access to Canadian companies with these proposed foreign investors, if you will. I think that's a critical component in establishing sort of that long-term mutually beneficial relationship that is in Canada's best interest.
And I agree, and that is exactly what the U.S. does in relation to a lot of their trade laws with other states, just because of the protectionism of the 60s and 70s. I was more interested in your final comments regarding the Nexon deal in particular, and I was just wondering if you see, or if the Chamber sees a difference between a corporation that invests in oil sands, for instance, or conventional oil in Canada, that is a market economy investment or owned by foreigners, for instance, i.e. Foreigners, Americans investing in particular oil sands companies, and companies owned by states that maybe are questionable as far as their human rights record and rule of law.
We're we sit on this piece is I think that there does have to be some differentiation from depending on the country and the relationship that we have. But if it's a state-owned entity, it definitely needs to the government needs to understand what the interest is they need to protect against, and then establish and legislate some good parameters around that. I know that there are some guidelines in the Act right now that talk about what it would be ideal from a partner perspective, but it would be really good to see some parameters around what does it mean when a state-owned company wants to make those investment decisions. I think that they can be relatively straightforward, but if we legislate that, then we manage those scenarios.
And in fact, wouldn't this bring a lot more clarity and predictability to corporations generally that want to invest, and also shareholders of stability in the overall market? Isn't that fair to say?
It would be a huge confidence piece. Certainly business are looking for predictability or stability and consistency in decision-making, principle in the decision-making, et cetera. So if it's, for example, ExxonMobil that has moved forward with the proposal, there's not as many eyes batting as a result of that piece, right? I think there's an interesting thing in the Alberta energy sector, which is in the U.S., they talk about foreign oil, but they think Canada is not foreign oil. In Canada, we talk about foreign investment. We don't necessarily view the U.S. as foreign investment in the oil patch, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
That relationship through the Free Trade Act.
And that is my point, because in fact, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70%, 65 to 70% of the oil in the oil sands is controlled by foreign owners, and much of that is, of course, non-state-owned. It's shareholders in the United States, my cousins, my uncles, family members, and others that are down in the United States. Isn't that fair to say they own the majority, in essence, of the shares, but they're publicly traded, so of course they have the ability to buy them?
Yeah, in terms of the ownership profile of the energy sector, in the last 10 years, the foreign investment in the Alberta oil sector, at 30% of it,
and I only have 1 minute left,
was equally U.S. and China.
I only have 1 minute left, so make it quick, please. And I was interested in more of this, and I will talk to you at a different time, but the EI suggestions that you have in your brief as well, you're suggesting that what we need to do is make it a fair actual insurance program and reduce barriers to mobility as well in that program to encourage people to relocate. That's fair to say, is it not?
Yeah, essentially what we're calling for is bring it back to a true insurance style of program. There's a number of other components to it right now that distort or actually not necessarily linked to somebody losing their job. They're valuable programs, but we'd like to see them funded separately. If we did that and then structure it similar to an insurance program, and the reality is if you live in a high-risk lifestyle, or I get a different insurance premium for a different neighborhood in Calgary because I'm more likely to make a claim on hail damage, for example. If we were to structure it conceptually like that, you're going to be encouraging the thriving and sustainable businesses in the regions of chronically high unemployment to prosper without being brought down, if you will, by those that are just struggling as a result. This is going to help basically remove distortions to the labor market, which is one of the biggest challenges, I think, both from competitiveness perspective and an economic prosperity perspective.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jean. Mr. McGinty, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Thurlow, I'd like to go back to some of the testimony you presented earlier. Can I begin by asking you, the government, there is no national energy strategy for the country. We have other strategies being pursued by the government. The Conservative members like to say, for example, that this is some kind of national energy program while they pursue other important industrial strategies across the country. This is about an energy strategy for the country, where we are, where we're going, what it looks like. It's not the mischaracterization of some kind of plan to fetter the free market. But I want to ask you, you are heading up an association. It's an important one, and it's a growing one around the world, in renewable fuels. Do you know what role the renewable fuel sector in Canada is supposed to play? Say, what contribution it's supposed to make with this overall reduction of 17% of greenhouse gases in the next 13 years?
Actually, I can answer that question. And part of the renewable fuel strategy that was introduced by this government was to set a goal of a 4 megaton reduction in concert with its Copenhagen Accord obligations. And I can tell this committee with a great deal of confidence, and this was reported as recently as last week, that the transportation sector strategy that this government adopted is working, and that is partly integrating with the United States fuel economy standards and partly integrating renewable fuels into the energy matrix that are being used by consumers at the pump. Ethanol and biodiesel have significantly improved climate change footprint, for lack of a better description, when compared to traditional oil and gas products. And the government's renewable fuel strategy has gone a long way in moving that forward.
So, for example, you said that the government lapsed a lot of money in the eco-energy program. If I recall, the federal renewable fuel standard is going to require 600 million liters of production. Where are we getting that production now?
Right now, we're not producing 600 million liters, and right now we're importing some of that biodiesel or renewable diesel from offshore. Unfortunately, canola producers in Manitoba, Saskatchewan are exporting their canola into the United States. It's being upgraded there and then sent back into Canada. What we'd like to see is some opening up of the eco-energy money, the money that lapsed just 3 weeks ago on September the 30th. We'd like to see that program reopened so that projects that we know are shovel-ready can get underway so that we can get them up and operating before the end of 2014. And that way, our domestic canola producers, our domestic seed producers can have their products value added here in the country.
I want to go back to something you said about Next Gen Biofuels Fund. You called for you looked at the SDTC and its commitments, the amount of money it's already that it's got that fund already being committed. But in a practical way, in my own riding of Ottawa South, Iogen Corporation is located there, and recently they decided to commercialize their technology in Brazil. They walked from a massive opportunity both in Ottawa and particularly in Manitoba. What advice do you have for this committee to try to prevent this from happening again? This is a huge loss of jobs, a huge loss of investment in new tech, because we're not talking here about food for fuel, as it is often cast. We're talking here now about next generation enzyme production to produce fuel, for example, from poplar trees, from straw. So how do we move forward to prevent this kind of loss from happening again?
So first, I'd preface my remarks by saying that the decision that was made by Iogen and its partners was an independent decision, a business decision, and it was based on the global assets of the entire company. And so they had assets to be deployed in other parts of the world. The recommendations that I would give this committee would start with the operating incentive of 15 cents. That is something that we are competing with in other jurisdictions. It doesn't exist for next generation. And secondly, I would want to make sure that the programs that exist under SDTC right now aren't changed midstream, to make sure that the fund is allowed to evolve the way that it was designed to do when it was first created in 2007.
It's my time, Mr. Chair.
10 seconds. So
Could I just respond to Mr. Leach for a second? Mr. Leach, I appreciated your remarks about trying to improve the regulatory system in Canada, but I did want to correct the record to a certain extent. One of the reasons why the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline was so significantly delayed was because the project proponent, Imperial Oil, it is widely understood now and agreed, contributed to about 4 years of delay by not meeting the timelines to deal with the regulatory bodies that were in play at the time.
Okay, we may come back to that later in the session. We'll go now to Mr. Holbach, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the gentleman for being here this afternoon. And I understand Mr. McGinty's frustration with Iogen being in his riding. Iogen was proposed to go to my riding in Prince Albert and set up this facility. In fact, they did a lot of groundwork, and they brought in a partner by the name of Shell, who, once Shell was brought into the picture, all of a sudden everything was a stop sign, it seemed like. And it's unfortunate that that's what happened. It's unfortunate they tried to relocate to, I think, Portage la Prairie, and even then they couldn't justify the numbers. I think the reality in the region goes back to what Mr. Jean's been saying and what I've been saying is when you look at doing business in parts of Saskatchewan now, the labor shortage is so severe that it drops the cost of production and the cost of construction up. I've got a pulp mill going on in Prince Albert right now. I need 300 employees just to run it, where I don't know where to get them. And I need 400 employees just to do some construction inside this pulp mill. And this is the actual same pulp mill that Iogen was looking at to make into biofuels. So, you know, I can understand why they went to Brazil. There's probably some economies of scale. There's probably some feedstock prices, that it's cheaper in Brazil. There's other commercial activities going on in the background in their decision. But I think we can take pride in knowing that that technology was developed here in Canada, and it's still going to be redeveloped and refined. And I still see a day when Iogen's going to build a plant here somewhere, either in Ontario or Saskatchewan, and I look forward to that day. And so, but it leads into one question I have is on the $500 million. You know, we have that $500 million fund sitting there that never did really get take up. Is there anything we should be changing in that fund to actually get it utilized?
Absolutely, and I share your sentiment as it relates to the Iogen technology. That technology will find its way back into Canada. There's no doubt about that, and I think that their decision, and Shell is also one of my member companies, so I'm in a somewhat precarious situation. In all seriousness, absolutely, we would like to see the fund reopened, the $500 million for eco-energy reopened, to ensure that we get the most viable projects going forward. And so what I would like to see, first of all, is a performance bond of some kind, so that when and if the program is reopened, that would-be applicants have to put forward 25% of the production based on their first full year of capacity, and then that 25% would be repayable when the major equipment is ordered and put in place. The second thing that we'd like to see is a very transparent and very timely and prompt window for new application submissions and selection, and then the final contribution agreement approvals. From the cash side of the equation, we'd like to see the existing production incentives for all renewable diesel projects in the program right now extended to March 31st, 2017, and review all of the other unused funds that are in that eco-energy program. Like, this is a program that was absolutely successful as it relates to ethanol, and we want to see that success emulated on the biodiesel side.
Okay. And I just want to, Mr. McGinty brought up a good point, and you mentioned the topic of canola and how canola is actually being shipped across the line, processed into biofuels, and then shipped back into Canada. Is that true? Can you maybe just elaborate on that?
It is absolutely true. And, I mean, we look forward to a time when that logistical chain is shortened significantly, and we'll see that value-add upgrade happen right here in the country. I mean, the renewable fuel standard was introduced by this government, and industry just hasn't caught up to it yet in terms of developing the build-out required to meet that need. We have 3 shovel-ready projects that are ready to go, that if the eco-energy program is changed in the immediate short term, we can be producing the biofuels that will meet the Canadian mandate by the end of 2014.
Okay. So then when it comes to canola, then you feel that we have the ability, we just need to have some time to let that ability evolve, is that fair to say?
Well, I mean, it's time and then reopening the program to ensure that the most viable projects can go forward. But absolutely, it could and should happen.
Okay. Mr. Brennan, Mr. Jean kind of talked a little bit quickly about the unemployment insurance and some of the changes you'd like to see made in the unemployment insurance. Can you just maybe highlight it again? Because you've got some, labor shortages is a huge issue, and just a good example, we've lost a huge opportunity in Prince Albert because of labor shortages and labor costs.
Okay.
So how do you think that would handle with the suggested changes you have?
Just a brief comment, Mr. Brennan, please.
Sure, absolutely. So basically, we're calling for changes to the employment insurance program that price more effectively, remove distortions for people to stay in areas of high unemployment and move to areas of low unemployment, essentially, right? So we're calling for the employment insurance system to continue to ensure that it has that safety net in the event that people fall into hard times or have a hard time transitioning out of their job, but also encourage economic activity to its highest and best use. And we're calling for federal government to remove, to change the way that it does these programs. So take the non-employment related benefits out of the program itself and fund those in a different way, and then charge differential premiums for areas that have chronically high unemployment. What you're effectively doing in a situation like that is you're encouraging both businesses and employees to find solutions to chronic labor shortages, whether it's migration to areas of lower unemployment. All right.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be fair to all members in terms of their time. Monsieur Giguère, bienvenue encore une fois.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Welcome, Mr. Giguère. Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy to hear
all our guests today because I'm very concerned about the future economic development of this country. I will be enthusiastic in my question. The industry of pulp and paper, sir, Mr. Thurlow, has problems. It's in difficulty. I know that there is a difficulty with technology. There's a lot of research that is going on in terms of the future and the possible involvement of biofuels. Can you tell us a little bit more about this technological path to the future for that industry?
And thank you very much for the question. Some of my member companies are currently looking at that next generation of technology. And for the most part, this next generation is going to be feedstock agnostic. So whether it's waste from agriculture or whether it's traditional pulp and paper products or the waste from those products, these can go into what we would call a cellulosic ethanol, where through a traditional gasification process, enzymes will break down this wood waste or this wood mass, this biomass, into a product that can be consumed. That process is ongoing, and the companies that are in Quebec are using the SDTC programs to develop that technology. My member companies are spending their research and development dollars right here in Quebec and in Ontario to develop that technology. So it's certainly something that we have on our radar.
Je vous remercie beaucoup et
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you ever need any encouragement whatsoever with respect to research and research budgets, you have a very attentive ear on my part. To the other gentleman, at the present time, Canada has lost 500,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector, and we have a deficit in payments of about $1 billion. And the economic strategy currently is to produce goods without exporting these goods, without any type of processing. Well, never before has Canada been had so much capital. There's some $6 billion that's there that is not even being invested in Canada. Mr. Leach, Mr. St. Clair, Mr. Berman, what can we do together? I say together, to motivate, to encourage investment for all these products and the processing process.
Mr. Sinclair, please.
Again, the question was, what can we do to encourage activity in processing, manufacturing, those industries? Well, certainly, I'd start going back again to the whole productivity issue. One of our recommendations was the extension of the accelerated capital cost allowance as a productivity measure. And to follow up on Mr. Caron's question about productivity, from our perspective in our chamber, what we see as being critical for the productivity issue is labor force development. We have to make investments in new technology, new equipments. The terminology is advanced manufacturing. We're shifting from people doing work to robotics. Machines doing work. Now, we still need that human capital there. We need people to program computers and run the robotics. So, that's one of the key things, and that's where we have to make the investments in those particular areas.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Leach now, please.
Well, I just want to point out that Canada makes its living as a resource extraction country, and I think it's widely misunderstood, the view that the resource extraction industries are not full of high-tech jobs. Our industry is full of well-paid engineering, scientific research jobs. The oil sands dominates the agenda or the conversation around resource conversations, but $2 trillion will be the investment over the next couple of decades in the oil sands. 1 million Canadian jobs will be tied to it. These will all be well paid, and they can't go anywhere. I want to point out the resources are here. You can't move our oil and gas, for example, to China. Canadians are going to be employed in these industries because the resources are here. My view is this country needs to understand that we have a huge opportunity in well-paid, jobs in the natural resource sector, and these are high-tech, research-oriented jobs in many cases.
Mr. Brunin, just very briefly, please.
Sure. Essentially, looking at this one, we need to agree on the objective of strengthening our economic competitiveness. From a resource perspective, it begins with a Canadian energy strategy with some level of agreement on how to develop our natural resources, understanding where the economics lie. Whether we understand where that opportunity is to upgrade, either, generally speaking, looking at the capacity that already exists in our trading partners, whether and to what extent we need to diversify our energy export markets. And I think one of the bigger things we need to be focused on right now is removing interprovincial barriers to trade. That will facilitate labor mobility and economic competitiveness across provinces.
Great. Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question for Mr. Sinclair. The Bill C-45, which is the Part 2 of the Budget Implementation Act, in that bill, we're calling for a one-year extension of the small business hiring tax credit. The NDP has already said they're opposed to it. You represent small business, medium-sized business. Can you talk about the advantages of that and why it's been so successful and why it needs to continue for another year?
Yeah, we're quite supportive. In fact, I recall when it was introduced, we did a media release from our chamber that night, pointing that as being one of the key aspects or one of the key things that we support in the budget. Yeah, I think the key issue here is, in fact, I think there's a general recognition that the real job generators in Canada are small businesses. It's the same in our community. I think it's the situation across Canada. The real engines of growth are the small businesses. In our community, we're quite fortunate to have thousands of startup companies in the IT field. These are students that are coming out of the University of Waterloo. They come up with an idea in school, and now they're operationalizing it. And in some cases, we have situations where you have companies that, these are individuals from engineering school at the University of Waterloo, started the company 4 years ago right out of school. Now they have 14 or 15 employees. Has that credit been a benefit to them? Yeah. It provides some money to them, and I think generally that's the driver of the economy is the small business sector. So certainly we're supportive of it. And
good, thank you.
Very much so.
Thank you. I want to ask a few of you one question, and I'll get back to you, Mr. Sinclair, in a second. But Mr. Thurlow, I want to begin with you. The NDP has called for a $21 billion carbon tax, which we say will raise the cost of everything to the price on food, the price on fuel, the price on everything that both workers and everyone else will have to pay. It's on page 4 of the NDP party platform, 2011. The Socialist International calls for a carbon tax, of which the NDP is a member of. And in Hansard, December 5th of last year, the NDP revenue critic, Mr. Mai, even called for a carbon tax. Could you please comment on that, and if that would be beneficial to the industry?
Point of order, Mr. Adler. Point of order.
Mr. Hansard, December 5th last year.
Can Mr. Adler table that, because I never called for a carbon tax. Okay. As you can recall, we call for a cap and trade, which is, if you might understand the difference, it's not the same thing.
That's a different thing.
No, but because he said
we'll table it.
All right.
Same thing Conservatives.
Mr. Chisholm. Mr. Chisholm. Mr. Adler, go ahead, please.
I didn't raise a point of order.
So our association is strongly opposed to any program that would add cost to businesses, consumers, or most importantly, make farming more expensive. We're in favor of what the current government is doing on the reduction of anthropogenic gases, and that's a sector-by-sector approach that is reasonable and logical for those individual sectors. Earlier in my testimony, I referred to the transportation sector approach, and an important part of that is the government's renewable fuel strategy. I think the government gets a little bit of a raw deal when people say that they're not doing anything on climate change, because this is a demonstrated program that is working, that will help the government meet its Copenhagen Accord Agreement obligations by 2020.
Thank you very much. And how many members do you have?
We have 23 member organizations.
And I assume they're all the same mind. Thank you. Mr. Sinclair, could you please comment on that?
We don't like taxes in general. We have 1,800 members. No, we have an environment committee at the chamber, which is environmental consultants, engineers, planning, and we have discussed this at quite some length, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of support or no support for it. I think we can achieve our objectives in environmental protection through other avenues rather than the taxes of this measure.
Mr. Leach and Mr. Brennan, if you could just please comment.
You have another 40 seconds.
I would just say that it's maybe not well understood across Canada, but Alberta was a leader in introducing a tax on large emitters. That program, I think, has been a success. Whether it would work in other jurisdictions, I don't know, but I think Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to introduce that. The fund goes into technology and research.
From my perspective, absolutely, we see carbon management as part of the broader Canadian energy strategy. We do support the sectoral style of an approach. We do support a life cycle approach to managing carbon emissions. It's important to recognize existing investments and the rate of capital stock turnover in those types of regards, and ensuring that there's not an inadvertent redistribution of wealth or competing sectors against each other in the process. And those are the broad parameters we like to look at in terms of approaching carbon mitigation. Generally speaking, that sectoral approach currently underway is one that's probably the most effective.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Chisholm.
Thanks very much. Thanks to the presenters for coming in today and taking time out of your undoubtedly busy schedules to present your idea to this committee. It's very important. I wanted to begin with Mr. Phelps. You raised, the issue of income inequality, and it's not only income inequality between people, it's also income inequality between provinces, between regions in this country. It's a serious problem. But in particular, you raised the issue of the fact that 1 in 5 Canadians are impacted by mental health. And it's been estimated by the Commission that this represents a cost of the Canadian economy of $51 billion annually. And I'd like you to comment, please, if you think that there's something that the government can do to begin to address this.
I think the government has taken some positive steps to address it with the delivery of the first national mental health strategy.
Yes.
But with that delivery, there needs to be a commitment to implement that and really to provide a leadership role to bring the provinces and territories to the table to deliver the mental health strategy. On top of that, the Canadian social transfer that is transferred billions each year to the provinces and territories to deliver social services. There is really no accountability measure put in place. There is no Canada Health Act. There was the Canadian CAP back a few years ago, the Canadian Assistance Plan. Back in 1995, that was virtually eliminated. Really, the only requirement to the transfer of social services is that there is no minimum requirement for individuals to access income assistance in the province and territories. So consequently, you are correct. From province to province, the funds are transferred basically into general revenue, and there is no equity across Canada or accountability to the delivery of social services.
Certainly a growing gap. Yeah.
Growing income inequality gap, and there is a role in which the federal government can play to bring the provinces together to develop accountability mechanisms.
Sorry. I only have a. I wanted to get that in. I appreciate you coming and making those points. I wanted to go to Mr. Brennan now, and I wanted to. You raised some concerns. You raised about the confusion created by the lack of clarity on the whole net benefit test, and that's a question that members of my caucus have been raising in the House of Commons now for several weeks. Well, actually longer than that, a few years now. But it's certainly come to a head of late. The minister tells us, go to the website, and it's very clear there what the net benefit test is. But I think what we're beginning to recognize, and maybe what the government is beginning to recognize, is that people that are representing businesses that are affected by this are concerned about the lack of clarity and are asking for a comprehensive review. I'd like you to give me some indication that you feel that the government is going to start paying attention and recognizing the danger of not having more clarity with such an important issue as the net benefit test.
Without a doubt, we see this as a critical linchpin, if you will, for future investment in Canada, particularly in Alberta. We recognize that there's an increased appetite for investment, particularly from emerging economies in Asia, to basically secure energy resources and technology, if you will. And as a result, when we have these net benefit tests, and this piece of legislation hasn't been updated substantially in some time, and it was a time when there wasn't necessarily a lot of interest in investing in Canada. It was actually before we had proven reserves the size that we have. And so moving forward, it's both timely and critical that we update this piece of legislation, because it's also going to set the standard for our prosperity and the way that foreign investors, particularly with new trade partners whom we're trying to court, will view Canada from an investment-friendly perspective. And so we very much are concerned about the lack of clarity around the net benefit piece, as well as the thresholds for triggering that net benefit.
Thank you. And I'm almost running out of time. I just wanted to say, are you getting some response, some positive response? Do you feel some confidence that the government is going to respond and bring clarity to that provision?
Very quickly, please.
We fully anticipate, the indications suggest that there is going to be some changes to that Investment Canada Act in the near future. We're hoping that they will have the comprehensive approach that we're looking for, particularly regarding definitions of net benefit and parameters around state-owned entities looking to invest in our country.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the presenters. I'm going to start with Mr. Sinclair. And Mr. Sinclair, you were talking about the accelerated capital cost allowance. And if I reflect in the fact that it should be made permanent, I reflect back to the home renovation tax credit that we put in, and boy, did it get people out there, and they were renovating, and probably more kitchens and floors and whatever. Is there a danger that because it's temporary, do you think, is it psychologically spurring action now that might not have happened, I guess is my first question.
No, I wouldn't say so in this particular instance with the accelerated capital cost allowance for manufacturing. Because regardless of how long it's extended or whether it becomes permanent or not, it's just a situation, this is what we're hearing from our members that are in the manufacturing sector, they will use that money that they save and invest it back into their organizations. Probably in further technology and better equipment, because as I've said on a number of occasions, that's key to the manufacturing sector. What we've heard to their members is they have to make these adjustments, and a lot of it is moving from the traditional forms of human production to mechanized production. The term that's often used is advanced manufacturing, which is the use of robotics and very highly mechanized equipment for producing everything from auto parts to food. That's really I think the position of the industry is we have to make those investments back into the industry, and that's what they would look at this money as being, is it's a savings that they're going to invest back into more technology.
So you wouldn't see it sort of creating somewhat of a
just rolling on through time, hopefully.
Laissez-faire approach to when they do the work then.
Exactly, yeah.
So if it was going to be made permanent, are you suggesting that it be the exact same formula as it is right now?
Seems to be, yeah. It seems to be working, yeah. Yeah, rather than, I think it kind of builds that long-term security and long-term certainty. You can do that 5-year, 10-year planning process if you have something like this in place, because right now it's extended every 2 years. Now, for somebody in South Kitchener that's running a manufacturing operation, if they can say, okay, 5 years, I'm still going to get this, then they can build that into their planning process, and particularly with respect to investment in new capital. That's a particular advantage to them. And that's certainly what we're hearing from our members. If they had that certainty, they would probably invest more.
If the percentage changed marginally, would that make a difference?
Probably not, no. Anything. I think probably anything that they have, any return that they get from the government, anything that they're not paying, they're certainly going to invest that back into their operations.
Thank you. Mr. Thurlow, I'm not an expert in your field, and so if you look back to the last number of years, we've heard about perhaps some of the things that didn't go so well with the programs. Tell me about some of the real successes in terms of how the money was spent and what we achieved and what are the long-lasting impacts. So can I understand a little bit better about
Sure,
what we accomplished with the
and
funding?
let me be clear. If it wasn't for the government's investment in the renewable fuel strategy, our association wouldn't exist. Like, it is important, this government's investment. So the ethanol expansion program was the first step, and using the ethanol expansion program, we built out several ethanol facilities in the country, and the key behind that program was ensuring that the renewable fuel standard of 5% was going to be met by domestic production, so that the value add that is the creation of the renewable fuel happens here domestically in our country. And that's what we'd like to emulate with the renewable diesel or the biodiesel standard. And so over the last couple of years, we haven't seen the same build-out that we've seen with ethanol, and there's a confluence of reasons for that. But we think that what we would like to do is just to reopen that program to have projects that have money, that have investors, that have proven success in the marketplace to generate this type of a biodiesel, that they have a shot at this eco-energy funding to make sure that the government can help meet its objective of $600 million, or 600 million liters.
I probably don't have enough time. I was going to ask Mr. Leach. He had two recommendations at the very end, but perhaps later. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Chairman.
Say that the energy retrofit program was working and was creating jobs and everything, and suddenly the government actually cuts that program without even all the funds being out. So it's really sad to see. Home renovation.
Home renovation.
So, Mr. Phelps, regarding we were talking about green energy. Do you feel that the government has done enough in terms of moving more towards green economy, or like moving towards that direction in terms of looking into what we can do in the future also?
I think innovation-wise, I think the government can invest more. It's definitely not our area of expertise, but we definitely know that other jurisdictions in the United States are heavily investing in green technology and green energy. I recognize from this panel that we have a high resources in the West that are very that have an appetite for today. But I think planning for the future and not necessarily just for today is something that the federal government could do more of.
Okay. Maybe on that front, I'll come back to you, Mr. Thurlow, if I have a bit of time. Regarding the net benefit for the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, we know that we've been asking for a long time for the government to actually give a definition or clarification. In this case, with the deal that was done with Progress and Nexen, there were some losses in terms of in the market, losses that were was actually some pension funds lost money on that front too. Do you think that those money could have been not lost if we had a clear definition of what net benefit was?
Well, without a doubt, the recent decision on the Progress Energy Petronas piece did create some skittishness in the markets, and we saw, as a result of that, we saw that reaction. That's a confidence reaction. A lack of clarity in the style with which the announcement came forward has really sort of given the market a little bit of jitters in that regard. So a little bit more robustness into the process and clarity regarding the decision-making framework, I think, could have avoided a lot of that, because the proponent could have come forward with a better understanding of how their proposal would have been evaluated in the context of net benefit and the parameters under which they would need to check in order to be successful. So without a doubt, I think it's critical.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Thurlow, you mentioned that there is a problem right now with the product being shipped to the U.S., coming back where there's value added over there and sold back to us here. I think we're feeling the same thing regarding fossil fuel. Where we're shipping away our resources somewhere else, they're
putting all the value added, creating the jobs, and then they sell it back to us. Can you tell us why hasn't the government done anything, or what is limiting you to actually move forward to have things done here in Canada?
So I agree with many of the parts of your question, but there's some of it that I don't agree with. I think the government has done a lot, particularly for the renewable fuel sector. The program that I'm talking about, it's a very modest change. There were applications that were made for reasons that are unique to each one of the individual applicants. The build-out did not happen. And as a result, we'd like to see that program money be made available again so that projects that we know are ready can move forward. It's true that right now canola growers are sending their product into the United States to have it upgraded and sent back. We'd like to see the program reopened to prevent that from happening so that the logistical costs are cut down for our farmers.
I'll come back to Mr. Phelps. I don't know if you saw the flyer that came out from Kelly Block, the MP for Saskatoon, Rosetown, Bigger, regarding the refugee cuts, health cuts. I know the government's really proud, and MPs on the other side are really proud. Can you tell us what your position is regarding those refugee health cuts?
Social workers have publicly came out against the cuts to the interim health program for refugees. I think there might be some misrepresentation of the cuts in some regards, and thankful that the federal government has put back some of the funding back into place. But in the sense of, I think we as social workers look to raise the envelope for all rather than to lower it for others. And I think recognizing that a person on social assistance in Canada is the same as a human that is a refugee in Canada, and meeting those basic needs and ensuring in the long run will be better for the economy to ensure that people actually have the health care services that they need. And if they're essentially not to stay in Canada, then it's an investment that is seen and realized on a human scale, not necessarily on a scale just on ensuring.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, for that answer. I think that was fairly honest, but I just want to clarify something, and I think you made that clear as well, too, that the program would see to it that refugees have the same coverage as other Canadians, not more, not less. That's correct.
That it would, the coverage that is extended is really extended to people on social assistance in Canada, and is no more or no less than other Canadians.
And I think that's what we're trying to. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Mr. Sinclair, you mentioned you talked a little bit about FedEv and $1 billion. 60% has been used, so there's still some money coming. Can you give us some examples of successful applicants and how they were able to expand businesses and expand employment in your region?
No, there's one firm called MyoVision that has received, I think, a couple rounds of funding. They do. It's information technology application to municipal traffic planning. They've received a couple of rounds of funding. They've gone probably in the last 3 years from 20 up to 50 employees. But again, it's in that IT sector. UW graduates came up with an idea in the university. They've been able to carry it forward, commercialize it. I think it's just not in the business sector, but the universities and the community colleges across Southern Ontario particularly benefited as well. Not only in terms of funding directly to the institutions, but the partnerships that they've developed with private sector partners. And again, a lot of those are in the knowledge economy, high-tech, biotechnology. Of course, biotech, like you, we're from Southwestern Ontario. Agriculture is important to us. That's, I think, a key area. From our perspective, I think the 3 areas that we're interested in are IT, agriculture, and manufacturing. Probably similar to your writing as well. But yeah, the successes are pretty significant.
Good. Yeah, you've done a good job, and I think you should be commended. I can tell when I drive through your town every Sunday and coming home every Friday, there seems to be more and more traffic, and that has to be an indication.
Well, it's because of a good Chamber of Commerce, obviously. Yeah. That's what drives everything.
I want to go to Mr. Leach for the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. In my riding in Chatham, Kent, Essex, we have seen a significant decline in manufacturing. We all know, we've spoken about this for a number of times, the importance of the extraction industry and how that has just generated huge revenues, and 20%, I think, indirectly of the GDP can be contributed to what's happening in the extraction industry, and much of that, of course, is in your neck of the woods. I wonder if you can tell us if there are some programs that are in place. We have a number, just a vast array of very qualified people that in the manufacturing sector, and I'm wondering if there's communication, and if the federal government can help, if maybe improve that between the cities, so that a community like Chatham-Kent will know what's available, what's being called upon by the industries in your area, and then subsequently can take advantage of that, and we can all benefit.
I got. You want to do that? Okay. I guess that Gary passed one over here, so. Without a doubt, I think there's a number of initiatives going on. Thinking about this piece, we do know that there are efforts from Alberta companies and our City of Calgary, as a matter of fact, to outreach to Ontario communities to promote Alberta as a destination in place of prosperity and job growth. So those do happen. We have Calgary Economic Development. The Economic Development arm has a specific initiative in that regard. We are moving forward collaboratively as well as a group of associations and industry professionals trying to raise awareness of the labor challenges and the various opportunities that are out there, from strengthening the immigration piece, tapping into underutilized talent. The last piece I'll share with you relates to, actually from a federal government perspective, there's two things. First is reforming the EI system. Remove the distortions in the market, encourage people to migrate from areas of high unemployment to areas of low unemployment. But secondly, it's about conveying the message of the strength of the Canadian economy as a whole, and the role that the energy sector does play into that, because it's important. I think often perception is reality, and if we can ensure that the message is one that's very positive and collaborative across our provinces, I think that'll go a long way to helping people with their mindset about moving to areas such as Alberta for employment opportunities.
Thank you, sir.
The private sector is doing a lot too. We have buyer-seller forums in Alberta where companies from Ontario and Quebec come and look for opportunities to sell products to Alberta-based companies.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. I just wanted to take a final round. I know we're just going to go a few minutes over our time. I did want to start, Mr. Leach, with you. You mentioned in your opening statement with regards to the challenges in raising capital, you talked about flow-through shares, and then you made two recommendations, and Ms. McLeod wanted you to just sort of expand on your two recommendations for the committee, if you want to take a minute and do that.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we had two, and Mr. Chairman, you'll know flow-through shares have been an issue that we promote as best we can. We had two specific recommendations to improve the flow-through share regime. One is that the annual Canadian development expense conversion limit to Canadian exploration expense tax treatment be increased to $4 million a year from $1 million per company. And secondly, the taxable capital test to access that conversion right from CDE to CEE tax treatment, the taxable capital test be increased to $50 million from $15 million. So those are the two. They're linked. We think it would make the opportunities for junior oil and gas companies a bit more flexible and take advantage of we have to deal with the fact that the cost to invest in oil and gas, the costs have been going up and up and up. These limits need to be increased to make the program more viable.
And just for clarification, so right now the sector raises about 2.5% by flow-through shares, but you're saying because of the lack of financing from other areas, you're hoping to increase that percentage and increase the overall amount, obviously?
Yeah. I mean, these numbers vary considerably. You can see how much the amount of equity collapsed from a year ago. Again, a lot of it due to commodity prices and things like that. But 2, 3, 4% probably is about how much the flow-through share program is of the total amount of equity raised each year. But it's particularly important for Canada's homegrown, smaller startup oil and gas companies. And we think it's a way to get Canadians investing in their own oil and gas development, as it does for Canadians investing in junior mining as well. So we think the program has got a lot of merit and deserves a serious look to see if it can be made better.
Okay, I appreciate that. I wanted to just move on to Mr. Sinclair on the manufacturing issue. You pointed out that Minister Flaherty had it in the 2007 budget, but before that, a couple of us were members of an industry committee that recommended it unanimously, in fact, by all parties. And I always believe strongly in committee work, so I think that was some excellent work. But you're absolutely right. It was recommended by the Canadian manufacturers and exporters and a whole host of other organizations. The challenge is, and members of the opposition will point this out, in terms of if you have corporate tax reductions, if you have accelerated capital cost allowance, the challenge is for industry and companies to show that they are investing as a result of these initiatives. And so you've stated, that it's working, but if you can tell your member companies, the more evidence we have as members of Parliament to go to the Finance Department and say extend this or make it permanent, because they will raise the argument of what evidence do you have as parliamentarians that companies are actually making investments as a result of these changes, specifically with respect to accelerated capital cost allowance. So do you want to address that issue that I know we're going to get challenged on as MPs if we recommend it. So what would you say in response to that?
In terms of specific examples, specific companies that have used this, I know there is one particular company, Kuntz Electroplane, which is in South Kitchener. They're in auto parts manufacturing. I know they've made some significant upgrades in their equipment over the next number of years. But certainly, I think as a chamber we could probably provide some case-by-case situations among our membership that would demonstrate the investments that our companies and our members have made.
Because that's, in my area, that's what I've asked for. I've asked for companies to tell me, do they utilize IRAP? Does it work? Should we increase funding for that? How do they use the shred credits? How do they use accelerated capital cost allowance? When we had the stimulus period, how did they use the work share program?
Sure.
And some of them were able to write me and say, specifically, this is the investments I made in terms of this machinery and all that. It would be very helpful for us.
I will do that through Dr. Albrecht. So.
Okay, appreciate that. And I want to thank all of you for being with us here today and joining us from Calgary. We appreciate your responses to our questions. If you have anything further, please send it to the clerk. We'll ensure that all committee members receive it. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.